Westorians. It is another Sunday. With me, as always, is Shae, and this is Valar Rereadis, where we look for the foreshadowing we missed, new depth in the world building, a better understanding of the plot lines, greater familiarity with the characters, and more fun than you can fit in all 7 hells. Though lately I'm realizing that I should probably put some word in there about themes, because we have been really hammering on the themes that come in small bunches or perhaps large bunches, depending. It varies. But there's been a lot of really notable ones lately, and we're going to be talking about a few more of them today. So sit back and get ready to enjoy that. Thank you to everyone who supports us on Patreon, whether you are a new patron or been around for a while or considering being one. We certainly appreciate it. It enables us to keep coming back just about every week doing this, having lots of fun while we do so. If you haven't seen it yet, check out the illustrated A Clash of Kings book. It is really beautiful. A lot of the artwork from that book has been, maybe not a lot of it, but some of the artwork from that book, because there's just so much, has been posted in our Facebook group as lead-ins to the individual chapters that we're doing each week. So if that hasn't encouraged you to get it, well,
it was the perfect time for it to be released.
What's that?
It was just the perfect time for it to be released.
I know, we couldn't have planned it better, even though we didn't plan it. It just kind of worked out. So you can buy it through our website. It'll give us a little bit of support if you do so. It won't cost you any more. So maybe that's better than buying it through other means. That's your call, but we would appreciate it if you used our links. And another quick announcement: Shae is going to be on the next Radio Westeros quiz episode, which is based on the Maester Crescent prologue, which is, as we've pointed out here, the second longest chapter in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. So you've already recorded that, though, haven't you?
Yeah, we have recorded it, and if you're watching/listening to this, you've read Maester Crescent pretty recently, so go listen to that and see how well you do.
Right on, yeah.
It was quite difficult.
I bet. You read me. You told me one of the questions, and I was like, So, yeah, y'all should definitely check that out. And, of course, I'm even wearing a Radio Westeros shirt today. It mentions Ashai, and I wanted something that mentioned Ashai because, well, today we have Daenerys 3, the one where Xaro tries to marry a dragon, a.k.a. Quaithe, Shadowlands travel agent.
Then we have Tyrion 9. The gang thinks Myrcella is a Riot, a.k.a. the one with king bread.
Then Davos 2, the one where Sir Cortnay challenges Stannis to a duel, a.k.a. Shadowbaby 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Jon 5. The gang meets Qhorin, a.k.a. Notorious Halfhand, ready to die.
Tyrion 10, the gang plans Shae's disguise, a.k.a. the one where Varys dreams of the voice.
And finally, Catelyn 6, the one where winning is losing, a.k.a. the gang fights the Battle of Stone Mill.
Of all those, I sometimes pick one of the batch of chapters that I think is the most important. Occasionally I've forgotten, but also occasionally I just haven't because it's too difficult. I can't decide which is the most important. I feel like I spent the most time writing about Davos 2 on this one, and with quite a lot for Daenerys 3, maybe a surprising amount depending on how you view that chapter. So we'll see, though. We'll see how it goes, as usual. I mentioned some themes, and in this case, the themes are going to be, one major theme here is going to be the awakening of old powers, with Quaithe and the dragons and warlocks, Qhorin and Jon, Varys discussing his past, Mel's second Shadowbaby, which we actually see on screen happening instead of just the point of murder. Of course, Bran's chapters have had an awful lot of this, with more to come, though not today. No Bran chapter today. Same Arya, who also doesn't have a chapter today, but she's quickly describing her, or having quickly described wolf dreams, rather, and of course the Faceless Man stuff is just starting to happen for her. Even Tyrion is going to get a little taste of this with the enhanced wildfire pretty soon, though his arc is among the least magical. And only like Sansa and Theon are not wrapped up in this, as far as the magical supernatural goes. And Catelyn, I guess she's moved away from it. She was in the midst of it when she was at Renly and Stannis' camp, but now she's back at Riverrun. She's kind of away from the magic, at least for now, until she gets right back into it when she, comes back from the dead. That's pretty magical. Super chat from Maura Lee. Appreciate the wonderful live stream. Just bought both illustrated copies of GOT and Clash of Kings. Shae is the best. Love you both and all the excellent content. Love also the kitties. Well, we love you too, and so do the kitties. It's very cool that you got those copies. I imagine you will very much enjoy them, as everyone I've talked to has. The artwork is really fantastic. All right, let's go to it. Daenerys 3, the one where Xaro tries to marry a dragon, aka Quaithe, Shadowlands travel agent. In line with the pride theme that we saw in the previous batch of chapters is Qarth itself and Dany herself. The Qartheen are huge on ancestry and propriety and ceremony. It's been built up over apparently thousands of years. Some of their customs, though, she's a little too proud to adopt, even though she's pretty good at adopting and adapting. She just refuses to weep, right? That's one she won't do. She doesn't mind exposing one breast. That's no big deal to her. But weeping, that's a pride thing, and she's just not willing to do that. Here's the opening quote.
The drapes kept out the dust and heat of the streets, but they could not keep out disappointment.
Yeah, she asks a lot of people for help, and they all say no, other than, Xaro and the warlocks. But it's amazing that she's even asking. It's quite a thing to ask. You're like, hey, can you lend me money to invade a kingdom? I mean, that's a big thing to ask. So you got to just get a sense of her as a person, thinking that she deserves all this and it's worthwhile. So she's disappointed at not getting something that's a pretty big ask. Now, the Pureborn, who are basically the rulers of Qarth, that's, there's multiple factions that are sort of in charge. They're nominally in charge, and they all descend from the ancient kings and queens of Qarth. They look at her a bit like the Red Keep looks at Jalabhar Xho. Here is what it said in A Dance with Dragons, the spurned suitor.
The rest of Meereen might see him as an amusing curiosity, like the exiled Summer Islander King Robert used to keep at King's Landing, but the Queen had always spoken to him gently.
So that's Quentyn, right? It's kind of a third example of this where especially Daario is like laughs in Quentin's face, So she's insulted by these rejections, but it's actually a good thing, because if they saw her as a threat, they would kill her, as is apparently a regular enough thing. Quote,
the Pureborn were notorious for offering poisoned wine to those they thought dangerous, but they had not given Dany so much as a cup of water. They never saw me for a queen, she thought bitterly. I was only an afternoon's amusement, a horse girl with a curious pet.
And we hear how often their assassinations work when they're not using poisoned wine or something like poison. And it's the sorrowful men. That's a mention there that's going to come up pretty big, because a sorrowful man is going to try to kill her in the 5th chapter of this book, which is her final chapter of this book. And of course, it's going to be Barristan who saves her from that. And that's a big part of how he wins his way into her service, along with one of our favorites, good old strong Belwas. It strikes me that Xaro's Owen Daxus is a bit like Littlefinger. He's really, really overly polite. He's good with words, although Littlefinger's, a lot snarkier, more sarcastic. But they also really pay a lot of attention to how they dress. Seemingly helpful, especially with navigating power politics and making money, but has a serious ulterior motive involving marriage. And in both cases, Sansa and Daenerys are both similar age. And I don't know how old Xaro is, but I kind of figure he's near the age of Xaro. Near the age of Littlefinger. He doesn't seem old. But of course, in reality, Xaro is not actually into, doesn't seem like he's into girls at all. It seems like he's into men, especially boys. So he's a little creepy, or a lot creepy. She can't help see some comparisons to living with Xaro versus living with Illyrio. And that is a great point, something that they discuss. Quote,
my brother and I were guests in Illyrio's manse for half a year. If he meant to sell us, he could have done it then.
He did sell you, Ser Jorah said, to Khal Drogo.
Dany flushed. He had the truth of it, but she did not like the sharpness with which he put it.
So it's a tough but fair point by Jorah, and, well, yeah, she doesn't realize how much has changed. Now, nor has Jorah admitted it, at least not that he'd admit. A lot has changed in their circumstances since Illyrio sold her to Khal Drogo. He looks at her a lot differently now. He now sees her as someone important. Before, she was just Viserys' sister, maybe part of the pawn, but now he's still using her as a pawn, but if we're using the chess metaphor, he's still a game player and she's a queen. She's a much more important piece. The birth of the dragons changed everything, but also her developing into who she is. Anyway, Jorah isn't wrong about that point. That's part of this. It's like Dany says, she just doesn't like how he said it, but she has to admit it's accurate. But Jorah wants to go east, mostly to have her for himself, it would seem. Though recall, he still sends Varys a message from Qarth. This is part of why he advises her to leave. Probably he's like, well, I just told them where you are, so we need to be on our way because I just outed you. Now it'll take a while for them to get this message, but we need to be on our way at least some point here. So, as it usually is with Jorah, he's useful even while being shady. It's like a mix of both. And there's this vast interplay, this web of different characters who are all trying to manipulate Daenerys. You got Xaro and the Warlocks, you got Illyrio and Varys, and even Jorah. So sad to say, but as bad as Jorah is, he is definitely the least dangerous because he's at least willing to die for her. Like, out of all the ones I named, none of them are. That is, though, of the people with ambition. Her blood riders have no such ambition. They would die for her and are not trying to manipulate her. Their loyalty is absolute and iron and really just unquestionable. It comes from a religious, cultural space that no one around them is ever really going to challenge, I can't imagine. It's really, really difficult to think that Ricardo or Jogo or Aegon would ever turn on Dany at all. So, anyway, I'm repeating myself. I've said this before, but it's a real shame that those characters weren't in the show. Her blood riders, dang. It's a real shame. It makes me wonder if they'll die at some point later in her arc to increase her building feelings of isolation, assuming that's how it goes. But it's also fair to say they are not as useful whatsoever in giving Dany advice about Westeros. Love him or hate him, or somewhere in between, Jorah is her only link to Westeros for only a couple more chapters, though. Whitebeard's a coming, and he can tell her all the things Jorah can without the, his own ambitions mixed in, or at least less of that. A lot less of that. An important line here, pointed out by Flick user Archmaester Rennie, that I agree seems rather foreshadowy, is also a good example of the kind of valuable advice Jorah gives Dany pretty often. Quote,
"Sellswords have their uses," Sir Jorah admitted, "but you will not win your father's throne with sweepings from the free cities. Nothing knits a broken realm together so quick as an invading army on its soil."
Though, to be fair and clear, Barristan will absolutely do a better job in this role than Ser Jorah. But it's not just the ambitious people around her trying to pull her strings. There's the pull of temptation, the call of ease. Quote,
"Let this be your kingdom, most exquisite of queens, and let me be your king. I will give you a throne of gold if you like. When Qarth begins to pall, we can journey round Yi Ti and search for the dreaming city of the poets, to sip the wine of wisdom from a dead man's skull." What beautiful sentiment until the end there.
Yeah, right. It's like, oh, dead man. Wait, what? Nina makes a good point in our Facebook group in regards to the 1,000 jeweled knight figurines that Xaro gives her in this chapter, or at least refers to that he had already given to her. It represents her entire experience in Qarth. There's ample opportunities for Dany to lose herself in the pleasures and splendor offered to her, but Dany is not interested in pleasures and splendor and is not corrupted into giving up her goals. We could point out that Xaro is kind of lying here, though, because he wants to claim one of her dragons, and that's probably what he means by them being king and queen. I mean, that is how they would become king and queen of Qarth. It's not just going to be handed to them. He's not going to marry her and people are going to nominate them for that. There's an implication of taking over the city in that, even though he doesn't mention it. So he's basically seeing the possibility of overthrowing the Pureborn via dragons in the long term, but still, that's not the reason Dany rejects him. Yeah, Jorah reveals the Qarthine marriage custom that, would enable Xaro to take one of her dragons. But even to that point, she hadn't taken the marriage offer very seriously. So, yeah, Jorah kind of seals the deal by revealing that information, but Dany probably wasn't going to marry Xaro anyway. She thinks the comet led her to Qarth for a reason. She thinks he's a child of destiny. But clearly she doesn't think settling down is that reason. That's not her destiny. Go to Qarth, live out all your days in luxury. Yeah, that's not what the prophecies are saying. So, and since nothing else is working out, all these other avenues are turning up dead ends, or worse, she's bribing people and it's not getting her anywhere. So, she decides it's time for the Warlocks. Well, Xaro, he's not so happy about that. His reaction here is, it's a bit hypocritical, but it's still pretty much on point. Quote,
"The merchant prince sat up sharply. Pyat Pri has blue lips, and it is truly said that blue lips speak only lies. Heed the wisdom of one who loves you. Warlocks are bitter creatures who eat dust and drink of shadows. They will give you naught. They have not to give.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty hard to argue with. But if we're really trying to argue against that, we would say the visions she'll certainly have some value out of those visions. So some is not. But given that they try to, I don't know, drain her essence or whatever it was they're trying to do there, Xaro is indeed right for the most part. But still, he's only trying to protect her because he wants those dragons or a dragon for himself. So let's not pretend he's being a good guy here. Still, the side effect of Dany going to the House of the Undying in her next chapter is that it also kicks off the Warlock's revenge, which in turn enables Euron. So, oops. In many ways, really, but in Dragonbinder, the Horn especially, it may turn out to be the biggest part of all of this. And this is a reminder that these Warlocks, it hasn't happened yet, but at some point they're just going to show up with that horn. And where did they get that? The point being, Qarth is this ancient, powerful city full of wonders, as it says, and a lot of these wonders are magical. And a lot of these types of normal, quote-unquote, normal magic things, like the fire ladder that we see in this chapter, are nothing that we would ever see in Westeros. Like, this is a street magician. He's not some powerful lord using magic and having lots of slaves and followers. This is some dude using magic on the street to steal, to use his cut purses to steal money. That's how he makes his living, and he can do real magic. That is very, very different than Westeros, right? People like in Westeros kind of downplay the existence of magic at all. That's hugely different. So it just gives you an idea of what a vastly different type of place Qarth is. It's much older than most places in Westeros and has had a more distinct existence, more recorded and more uninterrupted. And that's not a good thing. It isn't all bad, but there's a lot of bad in that. So let's talk about Quaithe, who is there when we see that fire ladder scene. She's different in that she, unlike everyone else, including Jorah, has a different agenda, if that's even the right word. Quote,
"You must leave this city soon, Daenerys Targaryen, or you will never be permitted to leave it at all."
Right, everyone else wants her to stay or want something from her, but Quaithe seems to at least maybe, be looking out for her. We don't know why. That's why I say maybe, because her motives are so unclear. But at least it seems like she's given pretty good advice.
She could just be the travel agent that you referred to her as in the title for this chapter.
She wants to collect all this percentage
like
of all the revenue that Dany
yeah.
gets for all the gifts.
Yeah, exactly.
So Quaithe says a lot of interesting things. The scene definitely deserves some extra looking. The bazaar scene, not bizarre, but bazaar. It's one thing that is interesting is she tries to get Quaithe tries to get Dany to go to Asshai. So let's get a bit meta here, because George originally intended for Dany to go to Asshai, as we know and have discussed prior, but clearly he didn't have that intent by the time he wrote this book, or at least this chapter, because 2 chapters from now she sails west in the opposite direction of Asshai. So it doesn't seem like at this chapter she's never really seriously considering going to Asshai. Yet Quaithe and Jorah, at some point, Jorah has backed off on that, it seems, but Quaithe is still pushing that line and says that truth is what she'll find there. Well, if George intends her to find that truth elsewhere, well, it would be from Marwyn, I guess, or maybe he'll just communicate it to the reader via Melisandre, or maybe Melisandre and Dany will meet up eventually, and she'll explain it then.
What is the truth, though, even?
Yeah, really don't know. It's more prophecies, maybe?
Yeah, because
knowledge of dragons?
Because, you can't help but think about the show, to be honest, and I don't know that I think Dany really learned a truth.
I agree. She didn't. They kind of hinted there might be some truths, like we had Kinvara and these other red priests that had brief roles where they seemed like it was building to something, and it built to something, but it didn't have much to do with anything to do with Dany's past, or it didn't build to anything relating to this. So, yeah, like, what is it? Is it something about the ancestors she saw in her dreams?
Yeah, is it something about the future, about the past, about
something about the past representing what's coming in the future, like history repeating itself, like she's heading down a path her ancestors did? I don't know. There's a lot of cool ideas. I mean, the ancestors he saw in those dreams are perhaps even more ancient than Valyria itself, so that's really, compelling to think about, but it's also not something we have a lot of information on. I think it has something to do with destiny, maybe. There's just so many possibilities. It's really neat. But it's definitely one that the show, like you said, it does not give us any answers. Trigo wants to point out that Jogo's familiarity with Dany, how he picks her up and puts his hand around her waist, and it's not even a little sexual. It's just a different culture. Kingsguard cannot touch the king or queen like that, but a blood rider, they can. Now, this is a little unusual because a blood rider to a woman is a new thing for the Dothraki. So while I'm pointing to these cultural differences, we also have to realize that this is sort of unprecedented. But in Qarth and a lot of these Eastern societies, the highest of the high would never show familiarity with a subordinate in public, and probably not even in private. Not like touching and sitting so close like that. That doesn't seem like something that the Qartheen would be down for, with all their rigid cultural mores and highly developed over eons.
But hey, it's okay if, all your friends can check out your wife.
Yeah, everyone gets to see one breast. And meanwhile, the Dothraki are much, much younger culture, vastly younger than the Qartheen. And while Daenerys is brought up amongst the Dothraki, quite a lot of her upbringing is shaped by that. The Qartheen perhaps are a reflection of her ancient past that her ancestors came from, some sort of echoing of her own history. And so there's a crossing here, maybe a cultural estuary where she's part old blood, but part this newish Dothraki culture. And she's just kind of unique in that she represents both parts of that. And like I said, though she comes from very old blood, she's not of the old guard, so to speak, meaning her lineage does not define her attitudes, at least not all of them. Like her ancestors, and the Qartheen too, were and are slavers. They considered themselves high above others, like the Volantines, who literally don't touch the ground for a year if they're elected Triarch. Like, talk about a strange cultural facet there. Compared to that, to Dany, so frequently going amidst her people, allowing them to touch her. Indeed, the comet, it all comes back to the comet because Dany mentions it here. It's a sign of change. Dany is old blood, new attitude. But even this new attitude is bloody. It's still fire and blood, even though it's a different kind of fire and blood. It's still part of her heritage, especially because dragons are just so damn destructive. And there are constant signs and warnings of this. The chapter has one of these at the end, one of the subtler ones. Quote,
Rhaegal and Viserion were fighting over a scrap of meat, buffeting each other with their wings as smoke hissed from their nostrils.
That's not playing, right? Dragons don't play, just like they don't plant trees. And Dany recognizes this. She thinks, I need to figure out how to train these guys or they're going to wreck cities. So she's aware of this. They bond with their mother, but not with each other. And if their respective riders, whoever those turn out to be later, decide they want to fight each other, the dragons aren't going to be like, oh, I have loyalty towards my brother, I'm not going to fight him. No, they'll go right to it. So keep that in mind. Dragons are, let's not lose sight of what they really are. Daenerys showing off her skills of diplomacy and merging with all these different cultures is really cool. Joe also takes note of this, and he points out that, yeah, she's trying, but it doesn't fully work. But it is still a good mark of her ability to do so, this adaptation, even though it's occasionally tinged with pride. And she also, of course, realizes that they want the dragons. That's what people are truly interested in, not her. At first, when she got to the city, they're all yell, "Oh, mother dragons, mother dragons!" But really, it's the dragon part of that people care about, not the mother of part. She kind of thinks of herself as a circus act, and well, maybe she's exaggerating a little bit, but there's definitely some truth to that. Now, rereaders obviously know how fake Qarth truly is, but it's of course easier to see that the second time through. Joe points out the bribes that just get pocketed, the boredom and general laziness that hangs in the air. People are just so rich, they can just not care about a lot of things or just ignore things that are beneath them. Like the Pureborn just kind of ignore Dany. That's kind of wild, really, when you think about it. Qarth is basically a big mirage, which is perfect because it's in the desert. That's a really good take from Joe there. I think that's great, especially if you include the House of the Undying and all the kind of mirage half-truths of those visions. Joe wants to know if this crown here is a Targaryen crown or patterned after a Targaryen crown. And I highly encourage y'all to check out our Facebook chats on this because Nina has some great thoughts on that crown. A bit too lengthy for me to get into here, but highly recommend it if you want to check it out. Stuff about Queen Alisanne's crown even. I see more of Hisdar in Xaro than on previous rereads. Both want to use Daenerys, marry Daenerys, take Daenerys as dragons, but neither really are very interested in her personally. So this is it's one of George's kind of themes, overarching themes for all the books, is that wherever people go, the Game of Thrones is being played. No matter what culture you go to, no matter what city, no matter where in the world, there are going to be similar types of people that have the similar types of ambitions. Daenerys' dragons are going to incite that kind of lust wherever she goes, and we see that now. We see that later. So if Renly and Jaqen aren't clue enough about magic being a real force again, we get like magic in the street, and Quaithe tells us that that's real magic. It's not a trick, because that's actually stated, right? Jogo or one of them says, a fine trick. And Quaithe is like, nah, not a trick. That is not a trick. Be real. So here's another quote. Khaleesi, do you see the girl in the felt hat? There, behind the fat priest. She is a...
Cut purse, finished Dany. She was no pampered lady, blind to such things. She had seen cut purses aplenty in the streets of the free cities during the years she'd spent with her brother, running from the usurper's hired knives.
Yeah, Dany takes some pride in this for having a better, more level cultural view, as in she knows what it's like to be chased. Like basically the things Varys says to Kevin at the end of A Dance with Dragons as he's dying. All the things that make a good king, having felt genuine fear, knowing what it's like to be hungry and thirsty, and not being pampered all your life. Well,
yeah,
Dany,
the things we've been talking about with Bran and Arya.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bran and Arya aren't being pampered, though. That's interesting. Like, you're totally right, but Dany is actually resisting temptations while also dealing with this. So that's
true.
Really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, relating to that quote, there were no hired knives. Let me remind you, that never happened until the wine cellar. So the time she's referring to, when she was younger, running from with her brother, there were no hired knives. Only later. And probably only that one time. Here's another interesting little quote that we just can't help but talk about because it gets into some minor world building.
It is easier to milk the stone cow of Pharos than to wring gold from the pureborn.
Yeah, Pharos is the biggest city on Great Morak, which is the biggest island in the known world. It looks to me like it's larger than the Reach even. It's pretty darn big. Pharos is in the northwest corner of the island, a port beside a river, so it looks like it's in a really good spot. And it's not terribly far from Karth. Great Morak, along with Karth, forms the Jade Gates. The stone cow is one of the gods of Pharos, apparently. I kind of doubt it'll ever come up in the main narrative, but, we love world building. John Hagee points out this quote, half a year gone, that man could scarcely wake fire from dragonglass. He wants to know what that means. What does waking fire from dragonglass means? If it's just an allusion to using it like flint, then that's a sick burn on Quaithe's part, right? She's just saying, all he could do was use flint.
Burn?
A sick burn, yeah. Nice. Good one, John. That's his joke. But yeah, it's an interesting question because we know that the bottom line is that whoever this guy is, he's taking advantage of the fact that magic is on the rise. And what does it mean that you can wake fire from dragonglass? Is there some sort of minor spell, something that did work in this era of lower magic that you could get a little bit of flame or flame energy out of it? I mean, it is frozen fire, right? So the idea that you could coax a fire out of it is kind of compelling from, at least from the way the wording of all these things is done. So I like that, but I don't think I have a strong answer. Something to look out for, though. I think we're going to get a little more into the understanding of obsidian dragonglass when the Winds of Winter comes and we actually start to see it used as a weapon in large amounts, which I presume is going to happen in the Winds of Winter, and maybe not until Stream of Spring, but probably the Winds of Winter. John also wonders if Jorah was learning about the Qartheen marriage customs for himself, right? He learned why Xaro wanted to marry, but maybe his initial instinct was to find out about Qartheen marriage customs so he could marry Dany. On the other hand, he's pretty adamant about getting the hell out of there as soon as possible, which doesn't really fit with him trying to marry her in Qarth, but I certainly wouldn't deny that Jorah would jump at the chance to marry Dany if he could. So, finally, one last interesting nugget in this chapter. Quote,
The collar was set with an enchanted amethyst that Xaro swore would ward her against all poisons.
Enchanted amethyst warding against poisons, whereas the silver hairnet that Sansa's going to wear to the purple wedding is an enchanted amethyst that is poison. So, I mean, that's not uncommon in the real world for the cure and the antidote, or the poison and the antidote, to be made from the same substance, or at least to contain the same substance in both. But interestingly as well, that the silver hairnet that's going to be given to Sansa might be getting arranged right now. Because in Tyrion's next chapter, which we're about to deal with, he's thinking about, well, I wonder where Littlefinger's at. I haven't heard from him. He's down at Bitterbridge negotiating with the Tyrells. And we know that negotiating with the Tyrells is the Purple Wedding pre-planning party, which includes the plan to poison Joffrey and frame it on Sansa and Tyrion.
By the way, just regarding this collar quote,
I
just wanted to bring up the significance of it being a collar that Xaro gave her.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, he's giving her a collar.
Oh, a collar.
Just that.
A slave collar. That's right. Great catch.
She gets rid of it, but...
And he wants to marry her to steal her dragon. Yeah, and to kind of make her like a gilded cage slave, like the old proverbial...
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great catch. Collar. Yeah, nice. Because it could have been... George could have picked any type of jewelry.
Any kind of necklace,
any kind of jewelry. Could have been
a
bracelet, a ring, but he went collar. Good call. Yeah, that's probably not an accident. All right. Tyrion 9. The gang thinks Myrcella is a riot, a.k.a. the one with King Bread. Possibly the shortest first sentence of the entire book.
The girl never wept.
Hard to have a shorter sentence than 4 words. You can do a sentence with 2 or 3, but it's hard to start a chapter off with that.
Myrcella is both very strong here, or also just like, screw King's Landing.
Yeah, she's like, it's good that I'm getting out of here. This place is bad. It's about to be war here. There's starvation and
But no, Myrcella is frequently referred to as being, a good kid.
Yeah,
a good
definitely.
egg.
Yeah,
she's strong. She's smart. She's beautiful.
She has some good cutting lines back at her brother.
She's the best of the 3 Lannister children, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind anyone who likes Tommen.
Tommen's fine, but like Myrcella is cool.
Yeah, Myrcella's cooler and older and smarter.
She beats Trystane at Syvoss. That's
true.
Good for me.
Yes, Tristane's not very good at Syvoss, it looks like, and she is apparently. So it's interesting that we see the list of ships that's taking Myrcella for Dorne. We get to see the very clear instructions that Tyrion has given the captain. They seem to be intelligent instructions. Interestingly, Davos is so knowledgeable about the fleet at King's Landing, about the royal fleet, that he names exactly the missing ones when the battle comes and they're all sailing up. He's like, gosh, where is this one, this one, this one, and this one? And it's the exact ones that just left to take Myrcella to Dorne. So when that comes up, it's just another example of why Davos really should have been in charge of all that, not just one of the ships, because his level of understanding is just amazing. This chapter is also the one where we get introduced to the Kettleblacks. Tyrion gloats about having them watched and how, Cersei, you're so dumb. I've got all this taken care of. They're all under wraps. But as we find out later, Littlefinger has them like triple agents. I don't even know how many levels it goes, but apparently they're more Littlefingers than anyone else's.
Mm-hmm. Also, Tyrion says the unlikely name.
Yeah. I love that reaction. It's like the unlikely name of Osfrid Kettleblack.
Just because he's lowborn, or just because that's a weird name?
Yeah.
I think the former.
Yeah. Yeah, you wonder if they just made that. It's like, let's make a name up. And of course, George is having fun with that because it's like the pot calling the kettle black, and so he's definitely having fun with that name. But still, with the point about Littlefinger, he probably hasn't taken them yet because they've just shown up in King's Landing working for Cersei, and Littlefinger isn't there. He's at Bitterbridge. So I think he bribes them to bring over to his side once he gets back. But it's possible he was this far ahead of the game and they were in his employ before they even showed up at King's Landing. They may have showed up at King's Landing part because he told them to or something like that. So the riot is really bad. It's really nasty. The total damage, let's go through that real quick. Unknown number of commoners, of course. That's, there's no way for anyone to count that really, but it'd be a lot. 9 gold cloaks are killed. Lollis was raped and impregnated. Tyrek was missing. Now Tyrek is interesting. It's long been theorized that Varys snatched Tyrek and is hiding him and will eventually try to install him as Lord of Casterly Rock as his own chosen Lannister. I think that's a fine theory, but I kind of lean against it because just the logistics of knowing exactly when the riot will happen. I do think Varys encouraged the riot, maybe even was the main reason it happened, but knowing exactly when it's going to have its fever pitch, exactly when the riot's going to break out, rather than just setting it up to happen at some point. I just can't believe Varys would know exactly the moment the riot's going to happen, because part of the reason it happens is Joffrey gets all petulant about being hit with dung. For all we know, Varys had someone do that. Maybe he knew that what kind of reaction that would cause. But still, you can see why that might be a little too much of a prediction from Varys. Even Varys isn't perhaps that talented at knowing what's coming. But it's certainly possible. So Tyrek might just be dead. And the reason this is an enduring mystery is that they never find the body. So yeah, he could be out there. Varys might have him, but we'll have to see. It's an enduring mystery. Also, Sir Aaron Santagar is killed, which is interesting because he was I think the only Dornishman in the group. So there's a Dornishman killed right as Myrcella is sent to Dorne. That may have been part of the anger of the crowd. Probably not. It's probably just a coincidence. The High Septon is killed also. Sir Preston Greenfield is killed, and it appears that Sir Preston Greenfield, as Joe points out, this is something I missed. I didn't really consider this. Preston Greenfield was the closest one to Tommen, and Tommen gets through fine, and Preston Greenfield is killed. So it's quite possible that Preston Greenfield gave his life to save Tommen there, or at least that his presence saved Tommen a little more indirectly. Joff sending the Hound to go after whoever threw that dung at him was, as Tyrion yells later, it's just stupid. There's no real analysis needed there. It is stupid. And maybe Varys did know that was happening. Maybe he just read Joffrey like a book. Joffrey's reactions, maybe it's that predictable. He is not a complicated kid. He's awful, psychopathic, but simple-ish. You can kind of predict what he's going to do. Boros actually raises his sword to Tyrion briefly when Tyrion calls him ugly. This is a good example of the difference of authority that Tywin and Tyrion have. Tyrion is acting hand. Boros would never have raised his sword and called Tyrion ugly if it were Tywin. He would not have, or if Tywin was standing there. He would never have done that. Just not even considered, because you do not do that to Tywin. So it's a good, even though Tyrion seeks to be like his father, sometimes subconsciously, sometimes consciously, this still shows a big difference in how they're viewed. And I do think appearance of certainly Tywin's reputation, long standing his hand is a big part of that. But people look down on Tyrion for what he looks like as well.
Man,
that's a big part of it.
Tyrion could totally be one of those people just like, do you know what my father would say about this? In any situation, he could just be like,
that's true.
My father, Tywin Lannister, would not take kindly to you embarrassing me in public. He'd be like, oh.
So we a theme here as well. Maybe not a theme, but a point that's made in this chapter. A big point is that the Lannisters are hated. Pretty much widely hated. I mean, by a lot of common people. Partly it started back with the sack of King's Landing by Tywin, and then has continued on since Joffrey's rule. Hasn't been great. People don't like Cersei a lot. But Tyrion they blame most of all, according to Sir Jacelyn Bywater. And Tyrion thinks to himself, quote,
perhaps my lord father was right to despise me all these years, if this is the best I can achieve, Tyrion thought when he was alone.
And he thinks to himself about Jaime. So I bring up this point about how they would definitely have just obeyed Tywin. Boros never would have done that to Tyrion, or to Tywin. They wouldn't have done it to Jaime either. They would have also just followed and obeyed Jaime almost without question because of who he is. Tyrion talks about how Jaime has that gift of men will just follow him because of his extreme charisma and ability and high station. But the high station is all Tyrion has in their eyes. They look down on him for not being a warrior, for not having that charisma. But there is more to this. We've talked before about how Tyrion seems to have given up in the first place on trying to please the commoners because in his mind, they're going to hate him no matter what he does. But Westorian Paul Berry suggests that Tyrion could have, if he wasn't so much like his father, found a few ways to improve their odds in holding King's Landing by winning the loyalty of some of the commons. Maybe even some love in the process. Maybe not just making them not hate the Lannisters. Why does he not do what, say, the Tyrells do? Try to feed the people. Sure, I mean, a lot of the regional food got torched. Their fault, if we're being real here. But they could maybe buy more from overseas. Maybe, there's certainly the issue of Stannis' ships maybe stopping them. But the fleet's down at Storm's End right now. They have an opportunity to maybe sneak some food through. Jon Snow later in the Dance with Dragons actually takes out a loan to make sure people can eat. I don't think the Lannisters would need to take out a loan. They just have money. So, and it seems like they probably just have money even without the Lannisters' personal cash getting involved. Why do I think this? Why do I think they can afford it? Well, Tyrion says to Littlefinger before sending him to Bitterbridge, take as much gold as you require. If the city falls, Stannis will steal it all anyway. So clearly they have some extra. It's a great point by Paul Barry here. Tyrion could have probably, well, maybe not probably, possibly won the Commons over, or at least made them a little more neutral, at least balanced out all the bad things he did to make them hate him. Even beyond whatever prejudices they may have, there's some things he did that aren't rooted in those prejudices, such as not long from now, he's going to burn a lot of people out of their homes and businesses to create some space along the shoreline there. And he's going to confiscate private merchant ships to use in the naval engagement. These are not things that endear him to commoners and even middle class and upper class folks. But he doesn't do a lot to assuage them either. He just says, live with it. And we should definitely think about why he had other options. You know, this is not the only thing Tyrion could have done. He had other ways to manage this issue, and he doesn't even really think of it. At no point do we see Tyrion think, what could I do for these people? How can I... He just doesn't really think about it. He just thinks of it as a problem to avoid or to be worried about. You know, he's certainly aware of how dangerous the commoners are, but all he seems to do is want to avoid that danger, not address it.
It's not really clear. I don't think Tyrion has much experience with them at all.
You're right, he doesn't.
I mean, we obviously haven't seen the extent of his life, but Tywin obviously wanted to keep him not so out in public.
Yeah, and in his next chapter, we're going to see how a lot of that is his detachment. Because of his extremely high birth, he just doesn't get things. Like when there's some things he misses, like when he tries to send Shae to the kitchens, he A, doesn't realize how offensive that is to her. B, Varys is like, dude, that's not a good idea. Like, people are going to fondle her. They're going to ask her questions about where she came from. And it's all common sense, basically, that Varys tells Tyrion there. But it's not common sense to him because he's so highborn. He just doesn't get these things. He never lived through them.
Highborn privilege.
Yeah, exactly. So Tyrion is definitely unaware of certain things there. And you can see that with some of the other highborn characters. Ned and Catelyn, they have some of these blind spots too, if we're being fair. But Ned and Catelyn also are older and more aware of some of these things. That's another thing about Tyrion, is he's a bit younger. But he's not young, to be clear. So beyond these, quote, endearing actions, the King's Hand really just, bottom line, the King's Hand, that should be his job. If the city is starving and the king is 13 or 14, then yeah, the Hand, that should absolutely be his job, number one, and be more than anyone else's job. And Ned would have fed them. Edmure is doing that now. The Riverlands is torched, and he's bringing his people in his castle, keeping them fed, protecting them. Dany would probably feed them. Sansa would definitely feed them. Renly would have fed them. Stannis, I'm less sure about that, but it's a fair complaint against him, but that's getting off topics. Tywin would not, and there's the heart of the matter. That's where Tyrion gets it. It's not that Tyrion, if the idea was presented with him, he might go like, okay, I could see the value there. Tywin would just be like, nah, we don't need to worry about that. So when Jacelyn Bywater gives him this bad news, we should consider that Tyrion's frustration at being the most hated of all isn't as unjust as he thinks it is. Sure, they blame him for a lot of things that aren't his fault, and they don't blame people like Littlefinger and Cersei nearly enough. But again, of everyone, out of all the people in King's Landing, the acting Hand has the greatest responsibility and authority to feed the city, and he doesn't. So, but to be fair, none of the council bring it up. Varys, Littlefinger, Cersei, no one else brings up, hey, maybe we should feed people. Maybe we should do that. Maybe that's a strategy that would be good. But on the other hand, Varys and Littlefinger, for example, may have considered that and specifically didn't mention it because, well, Littlefinger's going to ride in town with the Tyrells who are going to bring food and earn a lot of love for that. And he's going to be associated with those saviors because he's going to ride in with them. He can get to say, I'm the one who brought this alliance together. I'm the one who helped bring the Tyrells to the city. So he's going to get part of the credit for helping feed the city. He may have thought of that in advance. So if he hadn't helped starve the city in the first place, he wouldn't be a savior. This is what Varys is doing on a larger scale, right? We do give him possible credit for this riot and fomenting the starvation and not doing anything to help. But he wants to cause a riot over as much of the country as possible, not just King's Landing. He wants war pretty much everywhere so he can have his chosen candidate come in to do what Littlefinger's doing, ride in as a savior, or at least Littlefinger heading in is like part of the Savior Squad, where Varys is trying to bring in the Savior, Phaegon, right? Knowing Varys' plans, I swear, it makes these Tyrion chapters so much richer and so much different, because there's all these constant warnings from Pycelle and from Cersei and from Tyrion's inner monologue, from Arya's accidental eavesdropping back into Game of Thrones, that Varys has his own motivations. But on reread, we actually know what those are. Right? So we get to know almost exactly what he's doing as we witness everything he in real time. Well, in real time. Reading time. So, again, I'm going to point to how important Tyrion's choice of Jacelyn Bywater is here. His honesty and service is just so valuable compared to what he gets from other people. I mean, Tyrion's most important guy is Bronn, who he directly says he doesn't trust, like leaving Tommen in Bronn's clutches. So that just goes to show how few of his own men he can trust. And in a few chapters, he's gonna send his clansmen off to live in the forest to fight Stannis. So he's not even gonna have them around, and they're among the most loyal of his men. Jacelyn Bywater, something we pointed to earlier. There were certain people who couldn't look Tyrion in the eyes, and certain who could. Littlefinger looked him directly in the eyes. Bywater is one of the ones who can. He's not afraid of Tyrion. Littlefinger also looks him in the eyes. He's not afraid of him either, but he's the opposite kind of guy as Bywater, meaning that Bywater is just given straight truth, where Littlefinger, you can't trust anything he says. Bywater also points out how many untrustworthy gold cloaks there are, and he talks about what's going to happen if they don't want to look cowardly in front of their friends, but as soon as people start running, they're going to run just as fast or even faster. Well, that's exactly what happens. Once Joffrey is forced to leave the battle by Cersei, a bunch of them run, and it causes a huge problem. Meanwhile, after all this, important things are happening off page. Let's talk for a second about Bitterbridge, since we've referred to it indirectly quite a lot this chapter. Quote,
He wondered again about Littlefinger. There had been no word from Peter Baelish since he had ridden off for Bitterbridge. That might mean nothing. Or everything.
He then thinks he wouldn't blame Mace Tyrell for not wanting his daughter to marry Joffrey. But it seems they don't really learn what sort of man Joff is until later, meaning Littlefinger probably doesn't tell them, which we know from Sansa. A Storm of Swords, when Littlefinger is spilling his secrets to Sansa, here, at this point of this quote, he's referring to the point where he's just met Olenna. Quote,
A fearsome old harridan, and not near as frail as she pretends. When I came to Highgarden to dicker for Marjorie's hand, she let her lord's son bluster while she asked pointed questions about Joffrey's nature. I praised him to the skies, to be sure, whilst my men spread disturbing tales amongst Lord Tyrell's servants. That is how the game is played.
And we know they heard those disturbing tales and acted on them. Remember, that quote was from A Storm of Swords. But not until after the marriage had been agreed to did they act on those disturbing tales. So it's interesting to kind of parse this all out. So now this next quote comes in Sansa's first A Storm of Swords chapters, which is well before the quote from Littlefinger that Shae had just read. So we're kind of doing this in a little out of order, but in a way to show you how all this breaks down. Quote,
The lad seems kingly enough, I'll grant you. A bit full of himself, but that would be his Lannister blood. We have heard some troubling tales, however. Is there any truth to them? Has this boy mistreated you?
Well, when we get back to that scene, it's a reread. Yeah, it's back to that scene in A Storm of Swords. Well, we'll certainly see how she handles it, but we know she's like, at first she's kind of shy about telling the truth about Joffrey, but eventually she says, yeah, he's awful. And of course he is. That's straightforward. And
I mean, Olenna could have asked anyone at court.
Yeah.
That was willing to say anything.
True.
I mean, it was public. People saw her stripped and beaten.
Yeah, it's going to be real hard to keep that info from her. So she's got lots of corroboration for that, yeah. So the hairnet, we mentioned that a few times this episode already. It's given to her by Dantos in the last chapter of this book. And it's the same chapter that Littlefinger returns to the city. And also the same chapter that Joff sets aside Sansa for Marjorie. So all those things happen in Sansa's last chapter of this book. Last episode, we pointed out that the players of the Game of Thrones of all shapes and sizes recognize the issue with Joffrey and Tommen, that Tommen could be a puppet while Joffrey is kind of incorrigible. So everyone kind of notices that. Anyone who's a power player knows that. The Tyrells learn that not only is Tommen weak, but Joffrey is abusive. So the Tommen solution, as we call it for the Tyrells' point of view, is even more obvious because not only is Tommen a better ruler, but Joffrey is bad and will beat their daughter. So they just have so much motivation to make that move.
See,
and
I just want to point out, if you don't mind, I think it's a gamble of a strategy as well, though.
Yeah.
Because they have to, kill him. It has to be timed just right, you know?
Right.
Like, the timing of that so that she's allowed to marry Tommen afterwards, and they can't kill him before because it seems incredibly unlikely that they would let Tommen marry her without having to, like, save this alliance.
Yeah.
Because he's a puppet ruler.
Well, that's a great point, too, because the way they would get around that is, well, they have to have, like, permission from the High Septon.
Yeah.
But the High Septon was just killed in the riot. So they don't know. So in order to know that they could have the High Septon support, they have to know who he is. Like, well, can we corrupt this guy? Or what do we need to give this guy to get what we want from him? Well, they don't even know who he is. He doesn't exist. So that's an interesting little conundrum to mix into all this. So, yeah, that's a good point. So they may have thought of this big overweight High Septon, like, oh, we can bribe that guy to make this happen. And then being like, oh, crap, he's dead. So that might be a little thorn in our our plan here.
Yeah, they managed to. Yeah, it wasn't consummated. It was perfect.
Yeah, it never was.
It was just perfect.
It's true, it never was. And that's probably why they wanted it to happen so publicly during the wedding, so there would be no doubt the wedding was never consummated, because it would be.
Yeah, it wasn't
the betting happens during the wedding, and it didn't get to that point.
Yeah,
it was
it wasn't after it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty important. So you can see all the planning that Olenna and Littlefinger did here to just make this so perfect and so public, and to send the right message and have the right impact and blame the right people. Yeah, so it's Joe with a great point here. He says, after the oppression and brutality visited upon them throughout Game of Thrones and this book too, the small folk finally make their own strike back, and it's just as brutal as anything. Puts you in mind of a wheel that never breaks. Yeah, they're just desperate, and you got like unarmed people attacking fully armed Kingsguard and just getting slaughtered. It's really, you got to really be in quite a state of mind to do that. But they're starving, so I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it's like to have not eaten for days. How angry that would make me. I'm pretty damn angry, I'm sure. So, interesting little subtle use of the Bravosi here. Tyrion, when among the ships he confiscates, some of them are Bravosi. Stannis will not want to anger them, apparently, but he does engage with them later on in Dance, and Cersei does as well, because of course the Iron Bank is going to become more and more important as we go on. They've already been introduced, but their role is subtle to this point. The Sea Lord of Braavos, important as well to mention that he witnessed the pact for Viserys and Arianne so long ago that Braavos is pretty involved in Westerosi politics from a lot of angles here, and apparently going to get more involved. So Tyrion thinks on how lucky he is that Stannis hasn't arrived yet, and think you're going to want to keep that in mind when we get to Davos 2, which is next, and how the timing is so crucial here, and people are like Salladhor Saan and Davos are like, let's just go to King's Landing now, quickly. Let's not sit here waiting for Courtney Penrose to answer this challenge and do all this other stuff. Let's go now. And, well, it made all the difference. If Stannis had gone sooner, well, Tywin might not have gotten there in time. So, more on that when we get to Davos 2. And, of course, we see evidence that Stannis' letter is actually working. People are, during the riots, people were calling out the incest, which the main supplier of that info was the Stannis letter about Joffrey. And the proof, so-called proof of the incest. So Tyrion's kind of surprised by the knowledge that he's so hated, which is a bit of a surprise. We talked about that pretty thoroughly, but he also has his own kind of Tywin-esque reaction to it, which is he doesn't really show a lot of concern for them. It's almost like he holds a grudge against them for the riot. When he burns all that big part of Flea Bottom, he basically says, if we lose all of Flea Bottom, so be it. And that, Joe points out, that might be a little bit of pettiness towards the commoners for the riot. Might be. We'll take a few questions here from Will Moss. Don't they work for him from the start because their father is his servant in the Vale? Who is that referring to?
The Kettle Blacks.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we just didn't say that, and we had been kind of wondering about the order of things. Yeah.
I think, yeah, Will is right. That's a
Yeah.
good point. I should have realized that. Yes, their father has been in the Vale a long time, and I can't remember which one. Is he Osfried? It's Osfried, Osmond, Osney,
Yeah,
and
Osney.
Osmond. I think Osney might be the father, or Osfried. I forget. Whatever. One of those guys is can't keep them straight. And they're all in big trouble by the end of A Dance with Dragons. Two of them really big trouble. The third almost as bad. Anyway, so yeah, good point by Will. Good catch. That was my fault. It's almost certainly they're already working for Littlefinger even at this point. Joe Magician says, seems like she was partly seeing how much Sansa hated Joff if she could be reasonably be blamed for his death. Yeah, okay. That's a good point too. He's referring to Olenna, not just trying to figure out what Joffrey's like to know what kind of husband he's going to be for Marjorie, but to see if this plan to throw her under the bus is going to work out. That's a good point by Joe. Very good catch. I like that. Tyrion also thinks about including Reachman to attack Dorne to get them in the war. And later, Stannis in Davos too, which is again next, he thinks about how the Dornishmen are gathering in the passes. Tyrion knows that they're not going to invade, that it's just a feint, but he thinks it might fool Stannis, and it does. Sansa mentions Aemon the Dragon Knight crying when Daenerys married their brother, and she mentions Eric versus Eric, which is, the two Kingsguard knights. Now, she says that they died with tears on their cheeks as they fought each other, but Mushroom says that they cursed each other as traitors, so we don't know which is true. Either way, I want to draw your attention to Balin and Balin, which is an Arthurian legend, and that was pointed out to us in our Facebook group, I believe, if I remember. It could have been Flick, I'm not sure. Shout out to whoever dropped that note. I must not have included who it was that said that. And so, yeah, Balin, B-A-L-I-N, and Balin, B-A-L-A-N. That's an Arthurian legend. Look that up. You'll see a lot of similarities to these stories here. Now, something I never noticed before, Jalabhar Joe, I thought he didn't speak common, but he definitely says something in common here. He says he saw Preston Greenfield go back for the High Septon. So that's probably when he got killed, which actually kind of undermines what I was saying about maybe he was being particularly protective of Tommen. But maybe he saw Tommen to safety and then went back for the High Septon and then was killed. But anyway, it does add a little more clarity to what Preston was doing. Anyway, that's a big chapter. And of course, we've got another Tyrion chapter later coming up in a minute here after a couple more. But let's get to that. Davos 2, the one where Sir Cortnay challenges Stannis to a duel, a.k.a. Shadowbaby 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Why do you keep saying duel? Just for the fun of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's Is
it a reference? That
it's
I'm not
yeah,
getting?
I can't remember what it's to, but it's a fight, a duel. I can't remember where it's from.
I don't know. I was not sure. Hopefully someone in the chat knows what you were referencing.
It might be an old cartoon. It might be Bugs Bunny or something like that. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's in my mind from some old comedy show.
Okay.
So Sir Cortnay, great character who comes almost out of nowhere to drop a series of great lines only to die ignominiously. That puts him in a category with Oberyn Martell and Qhorin Halfhand. All three of these characters are quite brave, but don't stay in the story very long. But Cortnay, the least amount of time of those three. And here's his opening line.
Sir Cortnay Penrose wore no armor.
The opposite of Renly, given that he's about to be killed by a Shadowbaby, but the same result by the same means. He trusts in Storm's End. Right? He's not wearing armor because Storm's End is the armor, is his armor. He is confident. And, well, it's also indicated by his parting shot near the end of the chapter, or, well, near the end of his exchange with Stannis. I give you fair warning. If you force me to take my castle by storm, you may expect no mercy. I will hang you for traitors, every one of you.
As the gods will it, bring on your storm, my lord. And recall, if you do, the name of this castle.
Boom. I love it. Cortnay has some of the best dialogue. I swear. This is a really great chapter. And of course, also, Cortnay is not wrong. It's a beast of a castle. Hence, Stannis taking it via unconventional means. That's putting it nicely, huh? Now, Stannis says he can't have men say he was defeated at Storm's End. That's part pride, part authority speaking. Personally, I think he's overstating that point. Now he brings up the single combat issue. Cortnay does. And many of the Stannis' men love this idea. They're like, oh, I'll win undying glory, single combat, it's a great way to, what a great story that would make. Davos wonders if Sir Cortnay is seeking a way to yield with honor. Now, yeah, it's possible. On the other hand, And the other people point out that there's, it's garrison. It's a garrison. There shouldn't be any really great fighters here. It shouldn't be that hard of a win. Nevertheless, Stannis is not having it. And later we find out why, but he doesn't reveal in the open until he's alone with Davos. But in the meantime, all these factors, the honor, the pride, this glory seeking, it's all pretty well reflected in this quote right here. Lord Qhorin agreed. An easy victory to be sure, and what glory to win Storm's End with a single stroke.
Stannis raked them all with a look. You chatter like magpies and with less sense. I will have quiet.
That line is so like, geez, you chatter like magpies and with less sense. This is so the opposite of how Renly would speak to his lords, right? He would be like all flattery and be like, you would all make good choices. You all have good ideas, but let me just say that blah, blah, blah. And you know what he would do. Of course, it doesn't make any sense that Renly would be in this position of needing to take Storm's End, but he would go with the single combat route, and he would be like, Loras, bring me Storm's End. He would be so happy to send Loras in, and Loras would be so happy to do it for him. That fan fiction writes itself. But Stannis softens of all this, like, despite this like harsh tone he takes with his lords, he really softens when he's alone with Davos and Melisandre. And it shows us a different side of him. And this is so clever of George. Stannis is at some of his worst in this chapter, but he's also at some of his best. It's probably the only time in the entire story, the entire written books that we've seen so far, that Stannis is very human. When he's talking about how he knows he did love Renly and some of these other moments that are almost tender from Stannis.
I like when he says that he missed him Davos sorely.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's nice. Like this is the most human he'll ever be. And I wonder if we'll see this again when he's besieged at Winterfell or something like that, and he's faced with his decision about Shireen. I think that's when we might see him get back to a place of this kind of tenderness and humanity.
But I also wonder how much of his humanity is, tapped or whatnot by making the shadow babies.
Definitely a good bit, and that's a great thing to mention because it's such a big part of this chapter and how Davos notices that Stannis is drained a bit. And it's gonna, he doesn't notice how much drained Stannis is because the chapter ends with the shadow baby, so he doesn't fully see it, but he's already noticed just from the first shadow baby. So the second one's, yeah. And then, of course, Melisandre says, I can't do another one from you. And we understand why Stannis likes Davos. We get it. Davos is one of the most beloved of all the characters. Stannis, however, is, he's pretty gray, as black and white as he seems sometimes. I think he's pretty darn gray. And his love in the fandom is also pretty gray. Some people absolutely love Stannis. Some people think he's terrible. There are definitely people in between. I'm probably in between. There's a lot about him that I really like, but there's also a lot about him I don't like. But Davos, yeah. I love the guy. There's very little pushback, very little caveats on that claim. Of course, also Davos' finger bones come up here, and it's interesting that despite all his reluctance to worship R'hllor and his preference for the Seven, getting luck from finger bones is not really the kind of superstition that falls under the auspices of belief in the Seven. So it's kind of like an add-on belief. And Stannis asks if Davos still has them. Davos says yes, but in his next chapter, he's going to lose them because his next chapter is Blackwater, and of course he's going to go into the water and lose his finger bones. So Stannis was kind of being a little bit, I could say shady. I could say
shadowy.
I could say, not forthright. He knows he's going to take Storm's End. Well, he believes it because Melisandre told him. And he knows single combat will be fast, and he needs it to be fast, but he'd rather sacrifice a part of himself to make it certain. Like, give up some of his life force, maybe even a little of his honor, though he doesn't see it that way. Either way, he is 100% certain it's going to happen. Quote,
Ser Cortnay will be dead within the day. Melisandre has seen it in the flames of the future, his death and the manner of it. He will not die in knightly combat, needless to say.
So that is really something. So all that conversation that Davos was having with Cortnay, he already knew that this was going to happen. Melisandre had already told him this before the parley. So when all those guys are like, single combat, and Stannis is like, you guys are idiots. he has more information than they do. So it's Yeah, it's a point. So Davos is, when he's on the boat rowing Melisandre to the grate so they can get around the wards on the walls. He says, "Oh, I have no responsibility here," but he can't really make that claim. He's the only guy that could do this smuggling business, this skill with a ship at night. There's no one else that could do this that Stannis has in his army. So it's kind of hard for him to claim that he doesn't have a role in it. But let's come back to that. A couple other points first. Stannis says one day he'll make Davos a lord, and he surely does that and more. And he says that he won't thank me for it, though. It's all this responsibility and boringness and all this, and it's pretty close to true. Sir Cortnay jumping here. It's a parallel to Jaqen, right? Thrown off a wall to their death by a supernatural being, or at least using supernatural means. His death was meaningless, meaning Chiswick's, unlike Sir Cortnay's, which has a huge impact on the war. But we also have the parallel of Jaqen and Mel being crucial in a huge castle switching sides. That's only 5 chapters after this one, where Jaqen and Arya have the Weasel Soup incident, where that leads to Harrenhal going from Lannister control to Roose Bolton control, which is at the point where he's about to switch to the Lannisters, or at least to himself, while allying with Lannisters. But at that time, he's still with the Starks. So, cool parallel there. You got an assassination that leads to a major castle switching teams. In both cases, there's also a similar discussion of responsibility. Who has to take, whose claim is it? Like, who's responsible for killing here? It's a really interesting ethical conundrum. Davos claims he has nothing to do with Mel's mission, and she laughs that off as absurd. And she's right. He can't deny he's part of it. Just even though he's unwilling, he did it. Arya won't claim to be blameless with the Weasel Soup thing, but that doesn't really seem to matter to her one way or another. She doesn't really think about whether there's guilt or innocence. She's just doing her thing. But Jaqen is going to stab a man in the chest and come to her and, well, quote.
And the Lorathi brought the blade to Arya still red with heart's blood and wiped it clean on the front of her shift. A girl should be bloody too. This is her work.
Yeah, so Jaqen is saying that, when deaths, people should take responsibility for who they kill. It's an important factor. It's not just it's not a little thing to just kill and not worry about who did it and why. This is also sort of a form of sacrifice, right? Basically giving up a life to replace the life that was taken in the Arya situation. And it's kind of the same thing here, right? Stannis is sacrificing part of his life force to kill off Sir Cortnay. It's life, death paying for life paying for death. Note how Tyrion and Varys unintentionally discuss this same comparison. Shadowbabies versus faceless men, meaning Arya's future teachers. Quote.
And for Sir Cortnay's death, well, we know Stannis hired cell sales from the free cities. Perhaps he bought himself a skilled assassin as well.
A very skilled assassin.
There are such. I used to dream that one day I'd be rich enough to send a faceless man after my sweet sister.
So, this shows you again how ridiculously expensive they are. Like Tyrion, a son of Castle Rock, can't even afford a faceless man either. Jeez. And all this business of sacrifice is a wonderful circle to close. Well, it's kind of dark, but it's entertaining. Because speaking of sacrifices, it just wraps up so nicely that a big point here, a huge point here, is Sir Cortnay would yield the castle if not for the issue of Edric Storm. And this is complicated because he clearly thinks Stannis is going to kill Edric because as Robert's son, he has a claim, even though he's a bastard. And we got to ask ourselves, well, what does Stannis intend toward Edric Storm at this point? Right now, it seems like Stannis' only care is to use him as evidence because of his black hair and blue eyes and say, look, this is what Baratheon-born kids look like, unlike what the Lannister kids all look like. But later the idea comes to sacrifice him. I don't know if Stannis has heard this yet, and if maybe he's just not telling Davos, but he does talk about it. He says, I must have the boy. Melisandre has seen it. So my thinking is that Melisandre knows what's going to be done and what she wants to do with Edric, that she wants to burn him, but she hasn't told Stannis. She just is being more vague about it, like, oh, we need him, but she hasn't said why. Or she has told Stannis why, and Stannis isn't willing to tell Davos because he knows Davos is going to be like, what are you going to do? You're going to burn him? Excuse me? So we don't know. Stannis could be being even shadier than we thought here if he does know the intention here. But, and if he didn't intend Edric Storm harm, why doesn't he say so? Alistair Florence says so. He says, no, he won't do him harm. But Cortnay won't believe, and Cortnay's right. Even if he doesn't know the exact reason why he's right. So Davos says he's not involved in the killing of Cortnay Penrose, and Melisandre argues with him, and I tend to agree with Melisandre that he is involved, even though he didn't want to be. But Stannis' involvement is another question. I think that it's hard to say what he knows, what he doesn't, whether he's in denial. And his reaction to Cortnay Penrose's death is going to be lesser, because whatever guilt he feels over Cortnay Penrose, it's going to pale in comparison to what he feels about his own brother. And that hugely important character building moment for Stannis is here in this chapter. Quote.
I was taking a drink. I dream of it sometimes, of Renly's dying. A green tent, candles, a woman screaming, and blood. Stannis looked down at his hands. I was still abed when he died. Your Devon will tell you. He tried to wake me. Dawn was nigh, and my lords were waiting, fretting. I should have been a horse, armored. I knew Renly would attack at break of day. Devon says I thrashed and cried out. But what does it matter? It was a dream. I was in my tent when Renly died, and when I woke, my hands were clean.
The denial is just palpable here. Stannis is just like leaning on these technicalities. Like, my hands were clean, so there was no blood on them. Clearly, I couldn't have done it. That is weak. He saw something he couldn't have seen. Davos is like, this is wrong, man. Something is up. And it's wild to think about. I mean, think about oversleeping battle, right? Devon couldn't wake him up. I mean, you have got to be out to sleep through battle, being late for battle. Like, who can even sleep the night before a battle? That's nuts to me. So the magic is just so apparent here. And the dual impact here of how it impacts Stannis, his own denial kind of eats away at him a bit. You know he's guilty, even though he's trying to deny it. And then the way he talks, you see how that guilt is sort of playing around in his head, even though he won't admit to it. But you also have the life drain. So the dual impact of a Shadowbaby is the guilt and the draining of his life. And here is a description of it.
Now that Stannis Baratheon had come into his power, the lordlings buzzed around him like flies round a corpse. He looks half a corpse, too, years older than when I left Dragonstone. Devon said the king scarcely slept of late. Since Lord Renly died, he has been troubled by terrible nightmares, the boy had confided to his father. Maester's potions do not touch them. Only the Lady Melisandre can soothe him to sleep.
Yeah, what is she doing to soothe him to sleep?
I know.
Well, if they're not making shadow babies, they can't be. Well, maybe she's
making love,
pleasuring him in other ways. But either way, this description is before the second shadow baby, so he's already looking half a corpse and years older before that. So this is a big part of just when you imagine Stannis, when you picture him in your head, it's appropriate to see a different version of Stannis pre-Storm's End to post-Storm's End. They should look like 15, 20 years apart, even though it's only been like a month. So it's an appropriate symbol for people to give up, in a way, like the symbolism of giving up some of yourself for a child. But in this case, the child isn't really a child. It's a killer shadow. When you give up part of your own life to make a new, complete life, this is giving up a part of your life to create death, and it's fleeting. It's hard enough to grasp the morality of all this without the supernatural element, but let's get into it. However, despite that disclaimer, I mean, I think most of us would look at this as evil. Like, it feels wrong. Is it more or less evil than the killing of Renly, though? Or is it merely George making the method repugnant to challenge our sense of justice? If we accept that Stannis is the rightful king, and setting Daenerys aside, and no one really knows about her at this point anyway, he does have the best claim in terms of the law. I say that with full confidence. I mean...
And this is a way for him to reduce bloodshed.
Yeah. So Renly was a traitor. Sir Cortnay defied multiple direct orders from his king, struck him in the face even. So under the standard laws of Westeros, both of those two were fair game for execution. So really this boils down to quibbling over the method of execution. Now, George is so clever here because he put the seed in our minds in the beginning of the entire darn series that we should quibble over the method because Ned Stark, following his example, Robb and Jon, they follow his example. Swing the sword themselves when you have an execution to do. But it's also George is playing with this a little bit because the Shadow is in Stannis' image. He's sort of swinging the sword himself, even though he's in denial about it, and there's these supernatural means backing it all up. He's not gazing into the condemned man's eyes and hearing their final words, though, like a northerner were. That is the tradition that we're introduced to first, and the one that we say, yeah, that sounds like the right way to do it. That sounds more honorable. But is that really what all this hinges on? Is that really the differentiator? Is it really just wrong because of the method of execution? Is it just wrong that Stannis didn't face Renly and hear his final words? Is that really the difference here? I don't know. Even if you think Stannis' methods were unfair or even evil, he has strong claim from legal ground in as far as it ordering their deaths goes. So it really comes down to just the method of killing. And that is harder to argue with, I think, if you boil it down like that. It doesn't mean I'm sold. It just means that I think this is very, very gray. These would be tough enough questions in the real world, let alone in a setting with different cultural values during this uncertain, chaotic time when it's harder to follow the laws and rely on the laws with armies everywhere. But then you mix in the supernatural and you can wind up going in circles because we just have no real world basis for comparison. We don't imagine if the supernatural element is a deciding factor. Just imagine that in the real world let's imagine capital punishment is not controversial. Now it is, but let's imagine that it isn't. If you could just push a button to execute someone who was condemned by the justice system, would that be immoral? I don't know. I think it might be, but
it might be, but it would save resources. It wouldn't be a matter of bloodshed or anything like that, but it would save resources, I suppose.
Yeah, it could also lead to
But the thing it would do is there would be, if it was that quick and easy, people who were sentenced to die like that, there would be even less of a chance of them getting off if they were, wrongfully imprisoned.
You get into the whole whether it's right to execute somebody because you can't be certain they were guilty in the first place. You got to give them a chance to prove their innocence.
Stannis knows they're guilty.
Yeah, there's no doubt they were. In this case, you're right. That's not an issue. We know they're guilty. There's no question of that.
Ned, for example, killing, executing at the beginning of a Game of Thrones, he knew they were guilty. But there's more there.
Yeah, he didn't really get into why
we
know
they
law.
weren't.
Yeah.
We know that they weren't really guilty, and I don't feel great about him executing them at the beginning of that book.
Yeah, I agree.
It doesn't set that precedent that execution is good. Thankfully, I don't want to think that.
Yeah, right. So it's really just hard to find your moral bearings in this, but that's one of the great tricks George has done here is put the most moral character that we have in the center of it to kind of be our guide, sort of. And Davos very clearly is not happy with any of this. He says that he's never felt this sad. That's that line we have quoted farther down in the document here. So the moral philosophizing continues later in the chapter, but is more straightforward when Davos and Mel discuss the framing of mankind. Because we have Davos and Stannis discussing morality, then we have Davos and Melisandre on this little boat going to Storm's End, and they discuss the black-white paradigm, or gray. And of course...
Yeah, it's not something we quote in full here just because it's so meaty and good and long, but worth thinking about.
Yeah, it's so... You're right. Meaty is a great word for it. There's so much to dig into, and you just don't know where the end is, and you don't... By the time you finish the meal, you still don't really know what it was. Because it's just so... It touches on so many deeply held beliefs in the real world, like what we all personally think about justice and life and death and responsibility.
Dark and light, even. Yeah. I mean, truly.
And the way we see people. I mean, of course, in this case, Melisandre believing in absolutes is well, she's a zealot, so that fits. Davos is a guy who used to be a smuggler and is now a knight. So he's like, well, I understand moral grayness. I've been on both sides of the law. I have perspective that a lot of people don't, which makes him so interesting in this spot. A zealot versus a character who's had a very gray life. But we know that A Song of Ice and Fire is full of gray characters, so we almost reflexively side with Davos here. and I don't think that's terribly debatable. I think Melisandre is wrong, though. To be fair, there may come a time when she's not wrong, when it's the living versus the dead, when it's an existential threat. The good-evil paradigm actually fits pretty well. It's just humanity versus the dead. It's not hard to pick a side there. It's hard to pick a side when some of these houses go to war with each other, but that won't be hard to pick a side when that comes. So Melisandre herself is a moral conundrum. She's a representative of mankind's endless ability to look at the same thing, but see different things. It's a huge theme of this book, and George nails it by introducing it right away with the darn comet. One of the first things we see in this book is a bunch of people looking at the comet and interpreting it differently. Super well done. I love it. Great job, George. Melisandre has several debates with Davos on this little boat. The most creative and interesting that a shadow, at least to me, because it's outside of all this moral philosophizing, which gets difficult. Not that it's not interesting, it's just such a conundrum. But this other bit where they talk about what is a shadow? Like Davos says it's a creature of darkness, and Melisandre says no, a shadow is a creature of light. It can't exist in darkness. That the brightest flames cast the darkest shadows. Perfect example of looking at the same thing and seeing something different. In this case, it's the opposite. It's not even like they see similar but different things. They see the opposite. Davos sees light or dark, and she sees light.
You know what I think of too in there is Arya's mantra of quiet as a shadow.
Ooh, nice, yeah.
Especially with, Melisandre talking about the long night, and all that about when she talks about when that comes, obviously.
And Arya's obviously quiet as a shadow when she takes out Night King in the show, right?
Yeah, in the
so
show,
quiet, we don't even know how she did it.
Yeah. But yeah, they're like, the brightest flame casts the darkest shadows. And Arya's a dark shadow. Anyways, I don't think it is related to her, but it makes me think of her.
Yeah, and there's maybe some like Melisandre and Arya in the show is maybe more a thing than it'll be in the books, but maybe it will be. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Shadows are the servants of light, the children of fire. The idea that Arya ends up doing something Melisandre wants.
Yeah. The more I describe this chapter, the more it's like really standing out to me as one of the best in the entire book. I just love the debate and the fact that we just can't get to answers here. And that's life. We don't have answers when it comes to moral philosophizing. When it is, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's straightforward. But most things in life aren't so straightforward, or at least things that aren't so straightforward are pretty common. Now, interestingly, given this whole servant of light, servant of shadow thing, when she's going through the actual moment of delivery, when she's having the babies coming out, she not only calls herself a champion of light and life, Davos notes that she's shining during that moment. So it is like she's kind of a glowing with light. So that both is a symbolic add-on to her own words, but it's also just supernatural, showing that maybe, she thinks she's a champion of light and life in part because, she's lighting up and, she's, wielding fire, and it's part of her existence. It's part of what's shown to her through her own perspective. Her zealotry also seems to lead her to grave seriousness when Davos mentions the so-called god of darkness, who to her we know means the great other, a being of whom we do not have a lot of understanding. But the name, because it's other, that makes us think of the others. It's hard to not. Which also, in turn, makes me think of all the overlapping magic.
Yeah, it's hard not to think of them because of the name Other, but also the great association with darkness that they both have.
Yeah,
darkness and cold.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things there that you just can't help but associate them.
Yeah, it's really, really tight. It's wonderful. And then, it makes other connections. It's not just the long night. It's not just the others. Look at Jojen's misses on his green dreams. Quote,
Melisandre saw another day in her flames as well, a morrow where Renly rode out of the south in his green armor to smash my host beneath the walls of King's Landing. Had I met my brother there, it might have been me who died in place of him.
Right, so that's Stannis' quote there, and what I meant by Jojen in his green dreams is Jojen had all those green dreams that none of which were interpreted properly. And here we go. This is wrong. Had I met my brother there, it might have been me who died in place of him. Well, you didn't meet your brother there, but this is a morrow that is coming still. This is not an alternate future that didn't happen. It's Tywin is going to smash your army in the back because Sir Garland Tyrell will be wearing Renly's armor, and that's coming in a couple of book weeks here. So, and it's also evidence of both Stannis and Melisandre's hypocrisy. he rules out other possibilities. Stannis does for Renly's fate, meaning he's like, no, this was, Stannis. She saw it in the flames, and so it was kind of written. That's it. But he also, by the same token, agrees that no, Sir Davos, that's where you're wrong. Flames cast multiple shadows, and he's talking about multiple futures are possible. But here, he kind of contradicts himself. So, sort of to summarize here, his denials are interesting, but perhaps not surprising. Because, well, that's just kind of person he is. But I'm also surprised that Melisandre seems to deny it. This is one that really baffles me. Quote,
"And Renly Baratheon? Who was it who killed him?" Her head turned. Beneath the shadow of the cowl, her eyes burned like pale red candle flames.
Not I.
Liar. Davos was certain now.
I mean, a few minutes later, she pulls back her robes and delivers a killer shadow child. Is she really going to pull I didn't do it?
Well, you get into this in a minute as well, but we also had a comment here from Joe Magician in there where he was wondering how Stannis did this, and if it was like astral projection with a little more behind it. And then he asks, who was in control of the Shadowbaby? Mel? Stannis itself? And so you have some more thoughts on that here.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's such a bold lie that maybe we should consider that it's not.
I mean, the way Stannis makes it seem, I mean, it seems as if he was part of it and it was his desires, but it's the same thing where you look at whether someone was an accomplice or not and whether they were involved, and Melisandre is clearly liable or whatever for this death.
But the way they break it down, no one takes responsibility. Davos is like, I didn't. It's not me. Melisandre's like, it's not me. Stannis is like, it's not me. But it's definitely like,
it's all.
It can't be nobody.
It's all of them.
Yeah, I agree.
That's as simple as it is.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think you blame them all. I think they all have maybe not equal share.
No, Davos the least.
Yeah. So I was pondering whether it's a lie or not, even though it sounds like such a bold lie that because it's so bold, like I said, maybe we should consider that it's not. And while pondering that question, I was browsing our Flick group, and Tree Girl had a really good take. She says, quote, "They are Stannis' intentions, his desires in material form. Mel makes them come to life, yes, but they belong to Stannis." And what she's saying is that they're acting on their own. She brings those desires to life, and then they act on that. So they're not within Stannis' being when they happen, but they reflect how he feels. So that's why Stannis isn't actively participating, but it still looks like him, and it's still his desire. And that's why Mel can say it's not her, because it's his desires making this happen. If she just birthed the baby, it wouldn't just go kill Sir Cortnay unless Stannis wanted that.
Yeah, but she still agreed to birth the baby.
Yeah, so I agree with you that. I
know
totally
you
agree. I'm just
with
trying to.
You, but to make it clear is why we still it's still very clear that Melisandre is culpable.
Yeah. So this is obviously this is the main theme of this chapter, or a main theme of this chapter is responsibility. No one claims it, and well, it's really well summarized here, much earlier in the chapter. Quote:
"The Lord of Light willed that my brother die for his treason. Who did the deed matters not."
Not to you, perhaps. Sir Cortnay says that, and he cuts to the heart of it, the flaming heart of it. Hey.
Oh.
I've got my own flaming heart today.
Yeah, Z's got that in Santa Fe.
That's right. I was just in Santa Fe.
He just got back yesterday.
That's right. So the flaming heart was all over Santa Fe. Stannis says it doesn't matter who did it. And maybe he's right because he's the lawful king. The king has a right to execute people who don't disobey or who do disobey. So this is, again, quibbling over the method of execution, not the actual execution. But Cortnay suggests that quibbling over the method of execution does matter, and we brought that point up too. So yeah, if you believe in some standard of honor or that supernatural assassinations are extrajudicious, i.e. shouldn't be allowed, then you see Sir Cortnay's point. He says, it doesn't matter to you, but it matters to me. And that's what it boils down to. This is a matter of personal philosophy. Do you believe it matters who kills him and the method? Sir Cortnay does, Stannis doesn't. And that's what all of this hinges on, is whether or not, is that disagreement, that moral disagreement, that very fundamental moral disagreement. And so, again, there's no right answer here. I know which side I take. I think it's wrong, but I don't have a super confidence in that. I love that George wrote it this way. It's one of the grayest chapters. It's one of the best chapters for showing the grayness of morality, even with the supernatural elements in play. And again, Davos being our guide is just perfect. And Cortnay even shows this how this conundrum fits so well in that we can't make decisions because he says, not to you, perhaps. So there's even a little bit of leeway for him saying, well, it's a personal matter. It's a matter of opinion.
No mayhaps, though.
No, yeah, he didn't say mayhaps. He said perhaps. That's a good point. But let's look at the actual big moment when the shadow is born.
God's pervert
us.
Yeah, God's pervert us. God's preserve us, he whispered, and heard her answering laugh, deep and throaty. Her eyes were hot coals, and the sweat that dappled her skin seemed to glow with a light of its own. Melisandre shone.
Mm-hmm.
Panting, she squatted and spread her legs. Blood ran down her thighs, black as ink. Her cry might have been agony or ecstasy or both. And Davos saw the crown of the child's head push its way out of her. 2 arms wriggled free, grasping, black fingers coiling around Melisandre's straining thighs, pushing, until the whole of the shadow slid out into the world and rose taller than Davos, tall as the tunnel, towering above the boat. He had only an instant to look at it before it was gone, twisting between the bars of the portcullis and racing across the surface of the water. But that instant was long enough. He knew that shadow, as he knew the man who'd cast it.
So this is corroboration. Both Cat and Davos see Stannis' face on a shadow here. And not a lot of time has passed since Renly's death, so we get a little bit of information on these shadow babies, which is that they do not take very long to gestate, so to speak. Gestation may not be the right word, but it's the closest one I've got. We know pretty clearly because it's, Davos gives, or Sir Cortnay is given a fortnight to respond to Stannis' demands. And in that time, well, this baby has grown, maybe even in less time. Maybe it only took like a day or two, but it didn't take long. So interestingly, how tall it is. Notice it's really tall, and it's also tall in the candlelight in the tent. And it's interesting, too, that Davos is like shocked, and Melisandre laughs at him, which is kind of strange. Like, of course he's going to be shocked. What is she going to be thinking? Like, haha, you were scared of it. Like, of course, it's freaking scary, man.
I mean, to be fair, I laugh whenever I scare one of my roommates.
Whenever I birth a shadow, I laugh at everybody.
Yeah.
And so interesting, too, though, that the way the shadow manifests, like it almost seems like it manifests in the tent when Cat sees it, but here it runs down a tunnel, and it's kind of a little bit different the way it's delivered, but maybe that's just our perspective. Maybe it kind of comes through the tent wall, and that just makes it look like it was birthed inside the tent. So there's also a point here which described the black blood that's running down her thighs. That also happens in A Dance with Dragons in her chapter. And there's the same language of agony mixed with ecstasy. Quote,
"The Red Priestess shuddered. Blood trickled down her thigh, black and smoking. The fire was inside her, an agony, an ecstasy, filling her, searing her, transforming her. Shimmers of heat traced patterns on her skin, insistent as a lover's hand. Strange voices called to her from days long past. I think she's just going through menopause."
She has babies in like a couple of days instead of 9 months. You would get to menopause faster at that rate, I suppose.
Or much slower because she's quite old.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know how this works. Jeez. So she says much later also that the wall is a hinge of the world. Is Storm's End, maybe? I mean, an argument against it is that she says that the ones she'll release at the wall are going to be pretty powerful, bigger than ones she had released before. So it sounds like if they're both hinges, the wall is more powerful. And of course, it sort of makes sense that if it's a magical area, that makes sense why there would be wards, because, it's more of a real threat. Are these wards like Bloodraven's Cave? Will it matter again? Will the wards on Storm's End matter later? I guess they didn't have any impact in Fagon taking the castle. I mean, he's not using supernatural means, so I don't suppose that would come up. But maybe that'll matter later. Maybe humanity will have to flee to Storm's End. I kind of doubt it. I kind of think that things will come to a head at Harrenhal. That's my headcanon. But if the undead push even farther south, they'd eventually get to Storm's End, and we'd have to see if these wards that keep out shadows could also keep out the others.
Can I just give a quick shout out to Haley of the Manimals, who released a Beastie Boys cover, Sabotage. Harrenhal. It's all going down in Harrenhal.
Yeah. No shit went down at Harrenhal.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, look
That's
up
a good track. The video is really good,
look up
too.
Harrenhal Manimals and you'll find it. It's very catchy.
It's a full video. They did the whole song.
A whole music video.
Running around New
great.
York trying to do some of the scenes just like the original video. It's really good.
Yeah, we've had Haley on this show, too, as on our Why We Love the Animals episode. Yeah, anyways.
Right on. So, either way, things come in threes in this series quite a lot. Not just this series, really. Things come in threes in a lot of entertainment. But we've only seen 2 children of the shadow so far. Not only did we mention that Melisandre seems to think she's going to send some shadows from the wall because of how powerful the wall is, this hinge concept, but a third, just having the 3. So at least one more shadow coming from Melisandre, probably. But who's going to provide it? Who's going to give the life force for this shadow? Jon's undead, so I kind of doubt it'll be him. Stannis is already declared too weak, and he's not with her right now. Maybe someone on the wall. Maybe a wildling. Maybe Devon, who is, who is perhaps a bit like Stannis in that he's attracted to her, right? That's something that Melisandre thinks on in A Dance with Dragons, how she wants to keep him around because, she thinks Davos' service is important and she thinks he's worth protecting. But the fact that Devon is kind of into her is maybe a clue that he's going to be the one to give some of himself to make another shadow or 2. It's a huge coup, this whole switch to Stannis, so many men switching over. That's a big part of the aftermath of not just Renly's death, but Storm's End switching. The Stormlands just don't have another option now with both Robert and Renly gone. Gaining the Reachmen, though, that's a whole nother thing. It's briefly mentioned in this chapter that Stannis tries to send Sir Parman Crane, but it doesn't get to take the army at Bitterbridge, but Loras gets there first. So, being in mind of this switch, it's also interesting to reflect that they're not just switching to Stannis, they're switching to his religion. And that's a much bigger deal. That's something Sir Cortnay points out is how can you trust these people when they not only just switch kings so quickly, but they switch religion? That's supposed to be, tends to be anyway, something that you just have for life. And at least switching your religion to other people, it's from a perspective of people who've worshipped Seven all their life, seeing Stannis switch to R'hllor that's tough for them to accept. And it's also, a point of strategy for Tyrion to say, yeah, get the faith on our side. Stannis is going to come here and burn the Seven and all that. So with the argument of Davos and Stannis, so many other points to be made. There's another point that Joe makes here. Assuming that Penrose resisted because he thought Edric was about to be offed as a potential rival, but not burned because of his blood, maybe he was holding out hope Renly named the boy his heir, right? Because Renly doesn't have his own sons. Maybe he was hoping that Edric Storm would be Renly's heir until, he had his own son. And maybe he also thought that the Tyrells were going to come save him. But clearly that didn't happen. But it's a reasonable expectation that he would think the Tyrells would come. Interesting that Stannis gives arguments why single combat is a bad idea, but like I said, he was lying, kind of. He's known the whole time. Here's the quote.
Ser Cortnay was dead before he ever threw that glove. The flames do not lie, Davos. Yet they require me to make them true, he thought. It had been a long time since Davos Seaworth felt so sad.
So that's the line I was talking about him feeling really sad
It's
about.
a really sad line.
Yeah, about what his king is making him do. This guy that he just trusts and follows with absolute loyalty is making him sad. And, well, Stannis is earning his place as a standout for showing quite a bit of decency and justice in this chapter. And some humanity. He's also made his best, most honorable man sad via all this supernatural, this blood magic, this things that he thinks are dishonorable. That shouldn't be lightly passed over, right? Something that is pointed out by Brienne and Cat, right? Consider Cat's oath to Brienne. You're not supposed to ask service of your followers that bring them into dishonor. And well, Stannis has apparently forgotten about that, or at least doesn't see it as dishonorable, despite how uncomfortable so many of his men are with it. So that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough. and the hypocrisy is a big part of it too. It isn't just the supernatural, but just the fact that Stannis seems to be in denial about so many things and inconsistent about so many things. And a lot of these concerns, though, to be fair, a lot of these concerns are going to be sort of erased or at least dialed back when Stannis kind of changes his tune. When he sails for the Wall later on, that's going to be a big turn. That's like, respect. Okay, you're doing things right now. You were on the wrong track, but now you're on the right track. But we kind of know, or at least think we know, that he's going to get on the wrong track again because, well, if he burns his daughter, well, that's the wrong track. I mean, let's be clear. There's no two ways about it. And there's almost no way Davos is going to agree with Stannis if that happens. So that was probably the turning point much later where Davos will finally say, I need to follow a new bird. I need to switch away from Proudwing here and go to, I don't know, Jon Snow or something instead. But that's far from now, and we'll see. So I think I mentioned maybe also that Stannis... Maybe I didn't. Whatever. Stannis mentions the concept of good men in service to a bad king when referring to Joffrey, which is cool because that's also brought up by Varys much later in Kevin's chapter when he's, killing him. So that kind of that point gets brought up here as well, which I thought was cool.
It's the second time we've referenced Varys saying something is killing Kevin and company.
I know, right?
In this episode, I mean.
Yeah. It's kind of neat how, because it's a similar concept, killing a kind of a person in a key position, like Varys takes out Kevin because he's doing a good job and because he's in the way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Courtney's doing. He's doing a good job holding the castle, and Stannis needed him out of the way.
Yeah.
And the killing was pretty shady in both cases. It's like coming out of the shadows.
Yeah, but Varys did not need a shadow baby.
No magic, but certainly subterfuge and secret tunnels and evilly trained children. Joe Magician with a great question. Interesting thought. So if the shadow babies drain Stannis, do they drain Mel too, but no one notices because of her glamour? We don't know what she really looks like in general. Maybe she's not quite as old as she looks, but from repeated shadow babies, she's become withered. Good point. Yeah. I mean, there is some pretty strong evidence that she's old. It could be both. Maybe maybe there's some drain on her, but also she's hiding her age.
Yeah, which also, let's say she looked a certain amount of age old in the show. We could maybe have her age. Maybe she is not that old, but that's still incredibly old. But it could make more sense for people who have certain theories about her.
Along the same lines, Stefan B asked a really good question, which is, or at least points out that shadow babies must be a product of female shadowbinders only. A male shadowbinder can't do this. One would assume you probably can't use shadow sperm to make, to put it in a non-shadow binding woman. And
yeah, I was wondering that as well.
Yeah,
because when you were talking about whose shadow would be worse, or maybe someone in the chat was even worse than Stannis's. They were talking about how Jon's shadow would be, or
because he's undead or something.
Yeah, but think about Arya's shadow. Or I was thinking about Gregor Clegane before he was Robert Strong. Anyways, just the worst shadows that you could have.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know if I think there could be.
We also wonder.
I don't know that I think all shadowbinders have to be able to birth shadow babies. I don't think they do.
No, I don't think they do either. It's certainly not it's not a Roloris thing either. I think it's a shadowbinder thing, which Melisandre seems to blur that line because Westeros doesn't know the difference. But we have some evidence that Rolorism and shadowbinding aren't necessarily connected.
She's
directly.
A red priestess and a shadowbinder.
Yeah, which is red priests aren't all shadowbinders. Yeah, so that's this is a very important distinction.
But my question is, do you think are all shadowbinders of R'hllor?
I
don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. I don't think Quaithe is.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
So yeah, cool. I like that. It's funny that the term is shadow baby. The fandom coined that term. One day it'll be fun to compile all these terms that we all use interchangeably that don't actually appear in the books, like Phagon, shadow baby, things like that. The portcullis goes all the way to the bottom, and the bars are too closely spaced for even a child to squeeze through, Davos thinks, and so child to squeeze through, and it is a shadow baby, so that fits nicely. You wonder, too, Stefan B asks, would the shadow behave differently or more powerfully if there's lots of light? Could they have done this during the day? Probably not, but it's interesting. A lot of people point to a lot of quotes in this chapter, generated love. One in particular she was red and terrible and red. That one's so good. And Sherry Teedens wants us to shout out, are you afraid I'll piss on your burning sword and put it out? Yeah, burning swords. He knows it's not real. Another really important point here, Stannis drinking water. So a lot of people point to that as like, well, this shows he's just too stuck up. He won't even drink wine. Other people think, no, that's a good thing. He never drinks. It's a sign of his discipline, his strength. It reminds me of Donald Noy pointing to the different types of metal for the Baratheon brothers. And I think that Stannis is cool, cold water, the way he says, I show them cold water and they don't believe me. And Robert shows them a cup of piss and they call it wine. Well, I actually think Robert is kind of like ale. He's like this, rough and tumble common man's drink. He likes fighting and he's really popular with the commons. Renly also very popular with the commons, but he does it from more of a like charismatic, upscale, like, well-dressed, noble, like perfection image guy. So he's more like wine and Stannis is water. And he also says this quote.
If someone said I had magicked myself into a boar to kill Robert, likely they would believe that as well.
Okay, but would they not believe you magicked yourself into a shadow to kill Renly? Because that's more unbelievable, but it's true. And magicking into a boar, we got skin changing, y'all. That's nothing. Magicking into a boar, that's entirely possible in this setting. So I believe it. So it's fine for the commons to believe it. We would also be remiss not to drop this quote, a fave of mine and many, many others.
It's like an iconic line.
It is such an iconic line.
Only Renly could vex me so with a piece of fruit. He brought his doom on himself with his treason. But I did love him, Davos. I know that now. I swear, I will go to my grave thinking of my brother's peach. I just have to say, I think it has grown in humor as emojis have gotten more popular.
Because of the peach emoji.
Because peaches are indicative of an ass. So I will
go to my grave thinking of my brother's ass.
Yeah, it was funny in the first place.
Wait a minute, Renly's the one who was into men, not Stannis.
Yeah, which is also why it's always been extra funny, I think, to people. Renly with his peach, with his ass.
Yeah. So it's incredible because it's super funny even without that part, but that makes it funnier. But he's also saying, this is also just pointing out Stannis' denial. He's tormented by Renly's death and he's projecting that it's the peach he won't forget. It's really the Renly he won't forget, the little brother of his. He says he gets quiet and says, I know that I loved him now. I realize that now. And we know he's having the bad dreams. He's maybe dreaming of Sir Cortnay too, though. I would think that Renly's death is going to, be more prominent in his head. That's the one that troubles him more. Nina Frill points out that Cortnay is right on the money when he yells at Alistair Florent saying, what god will you have tomorrow and what king will you follow tomorrow? And it is Alistair Florent who, independent of Stannis' permission, tries to arrange a surrender after the loss of Blackwater Bay so he can have his keep back. And of course, what's he get for that? He gets burned for that. Speaking of advisors Stannis isn't super happy with, he doesn't want to hear Salah's advice. He cuts Davos off when Davos is talking about what Salah's had to say. And it's funny because Stannis is like, I won't trust a Lysine brigand, even though he doesn't trust his lords either. And Davos is a smuggler, so... But I really want to know what he was actually going to say. What was Salah's advice going to be? We know that Salah advised going straight for King's Landing, just like Davos and some others, but this was something a little more specific, but we don't know what it is. If anyone has thoughts, drop them in the chat, y'all. If Stannis somehow survives everything, Archmaester Renly wonders if he might take the black, since this line casually suggests it. The day I need counsel from a Lysine brigand is the day I put off my crown and take the black. It used to be a popular idea in the fandom that Stannis would take the black after either Jon was revealed to be ahead of him, which I doubted, or for reasons unforeseen, which I also doubted, but less so. But the reason I doubt that this would happen is I'm dubious there will even be a Night's Watch at the end, or a wall, maybe. And Stannis also is not exactly portrayed as someone willing to kind of bend the knee to surrender. I think he'd rather die than take the black.
But the thing is, he does go to the wall, and he will lose his crown.
That's true, and he doesn't directly take the black. So I guess you could see it as he's serving the Night's Watch, even though he's not literally taking the black. So I could see that as an interpretation. That's fair. Yeah, okay.
And he won't be king anymore.
And just to add weight to that theory, it's, the TV show gives us his death, and even though I very much doubt that's the way he's going to die, the fact that he dies at all is enough to add some weight to the fact that he won't live to take the black later. It's interesting, too, that he should have taken the advice of the, quote, Lysine brigand and Davos and these others. he's just so prideful about, oh, I can't have it said that I was defeated at Storm's End. Well, if he takes the Iron Throne within a couple weeks after that, then so what? If people say you were defeated at Storm's End, but that you took the capital, I don't think that's going to be such a big deal that they're like, oh, you lost at Storm's End. Yeah, but y'all, I took the throne. And once he takes the throne, he can just send more men back down to go ahead and take Storm's End after all. He just comes right back a few weeks later. So,
I mean, he does express that he is concerned about being taken in the rear.
Yes, he is. He is a little bit concerned about that.
It's pride and, his status and all that and how people perceive him, I think, more so is what he's expressing. But there definitely is the chance that someone could catch him.
Well, Davos makes that point that all the more reason to go now. He says that if you're worried about them catching us in the rear, all the more reason to take the city as soon as possible before they have the chance to do that.
Yeah.
And in fact, the delay does cause that to happen.
I mean, in no way do I agree with Stannis and Melisandre's decision here.
Yeah. So I brought this up earlier, but just as a reminder, they waited a week to hear what Sir Cortnay was going to do, to give him time to decide whether to surrender or not. But let's also forget how much rumor there is about this incident in general. Many think that it was Cat or Brienne. Quote, hers was the hand that slew the king.
A lie, Sir Cortnay said. I knew Brienne when she was no more than a girl playing at her father's feet in Evenfall Hall. Mm-hmm. And I knew her still better when the Evenstar sent her here to Storm's End. She loved Renly Baratheon from the first moment she laid eyes on him. A blind man could see it.
Also, let's recall that some blamed a camp follower, right? And it bears a striking resemblance to the death of Septon Moon, a character in Fire and Blood with huge parallels to both Robert and Renly. He was murdered in the midst of his army, also having his throat cut. Well, for more on that parallel, check out our 2019 New Year's Day Fire and Blood livestream, as well as our Faithless Man Iron Bank Fire and Blood livestream. Rob Swelzel asks, does that skin changer with the boar up north show up soon after this line about magicking into a boar? No, that's Borak as his name. He does not show up till Dance with Dragons. But we know there's a precedent for this. So it's still pretty relevant, even though it's not the exact timing. Well, that was a lot of meat on that chapter. It's going to go down as one of the more important ones of the book, I think, after having done all this analysis and seeing all y'all's thoughts on it. Y'all had trouble with that.
Y'all divs.
But this is shaping up to be one of our longest episodes of all of Valar Rereadis. So let's keep moving and go to John 5. The gang meets Qhorin, a.k.a. the Notorious Halfhand, ready to die. Quote,
the call came drifting through the black of night.
This is such a setup. The horn blasts have always been a setup since they were introduced as a plot device. They're like Pavlov's horn. Every time someone mentions a horn, we salivate at the idea of there being 3 blasts because it means the others. And we want it to be the others because we want to see them on screen. We want to go further into the mystery of them. We want answers. But frankly, we'd even settle for additional questions to ponder, because we love those too. Even when we don't have answers, well, questions are fun. We just get to think about it. It gives us options. This ominous start also sets the tone for a character whose placement in the story seems clear enough. Even George R. R. Martin, the breaker of tropes, went for the more straightforward case with this one. Quote,
we can only die. Why else do we don these black cloaks but to die in defense of the realm?
So in a series where almost no one seems safe, everything about Qhorin Halfhand screams short-lived character. He lasts longer than Sir Cortnay Penrose, but if they saw each other at orientation in the afterlife, assuming that's what they have, right? Afterlife orientation.
Yeah, they have the 7 heavens, and so there's 7 orientations.
I imagine they'd look at each other and respectfully nod to each other as if to say, hey, you too were a short-lived A Song of Ice and Fire badass, and in the same book even. And the Raven gets in on the evidence of Qhorin's fate here.
Die, the Raven muttered, pacing along Mormont's shoulders. Die, 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 die.
Yeah, okay. Be a little direct there. This is part of the point, though.
The Raven just likes to game.
It does.
Just throwing its dice.
5 dice, apparently. So this is part of the point, though. The people dying off, it's like the changing of the guard, in part because Westeros itself is entering a new era. Much of human society is built on the older taking advantage of the younger, whether literally older in years or older by benefit of long-held power structures, right? Like Lannisters are really powerful, even the younger ones, because of all the power they inherit. But the big Lannisters even pick on the small Lannisters. This is just the long-standing tradition of sorts, passed down from generation to generation. Real change comes when the young turn the tables on the old and make sacrifices of not just the old, but the old ways, rather than becoming fodder for the increasingly corrupt machines that so many who came before have been running. This is Qarth. We bring back Qarth is like a city-sized version of this lesson, because the machines that these societies grow over time, they are fueled with blood. This is the beauty of Qhorin Halfhand, because in some ways, though he's as tropey as they come, he's used perfectly in the narrative in a manner so well fitted to the bloody themes of this book. Old powers are indeed awakening, as he himself says, and he's going to be kind of sacrificed for the sake of fighting the perils that come with this new era. Though unlike the vast majority, he's going to embrace it. He will do what must be done. He will be a man of the Night's Watch. And men of the Night's Watch give their all for the realm, whether it be life or honor even. They must give it all. No character embodies this concept more than he, I'd say. Were he a knight, he'd be a true knight. The real-world version of Qhorin is, I don't even know. He's there's just a great guy that, or even woman would fit as well. Just someone that you would look up to, that you would always follow, that you would never question, that you just have so much belief in. So rather than pursuing cynical means of power, causing great suffering to others to prolong the life of something that does not deserve life, meaning the old ways of living, meaning the old beliefs of people like the Maesters who downplay the supernatural, which is clearly coming, Qhorin Halfhand tries to avoid death. You know, he's a person, he's human, but he accepts it, and the certainty of his beliefs perhaps make that all easier to swallow, meaning that he can accept his own death because he has such conviction in his duty. He can either be said to have a great pride in following the vows of the Night's Watch, or that he has no pride at all because he's so willing to give up his own honor and his own life. So I would say the latter. And this is part of why Jon has to be with him. This is part of why the narrative takes this turn, to learn these lessons, but to also have the proverbial torch passing, but in Martin style, with Jon forced to sacrifice him in near literal fashion. Like, Jon has to kill Qhorin to move on, to do the things that he has to do. And Qhorin is a willing sacrifice in that. Jon continues to puzzle over the Dragonglass cache. Most of the Rangers are they're like, yeah, that's nice, but they don't really make use of it, as I said in the last Jon chapter. Even Jon thinks about how Sam's going to like the horn because it's old, and Sam loves, quote, even old worthless things. But I don't know that horn is useless or worthless. We'll see. We got a long time before we find out what that happens, but I can't wait. As Jon is considering his new semi-magical items, the Halfhand speaks of Mance leading his people to some as well. Something meaning. Quote,
he is seeking something in the high, cold places. He is searching for something he needs.
Something?
Mormont's raven lifted its head and screamed. The sound was sharp as a knife in the closeness of the tent. Some power.
So while Qhorin embraces death, he's also embracing the supernatural here, which is really interesting because you mostly have people just downplaying it or denying it or anything. This is an unusual character to be at the forefront of this, an older ranger. But in other ways, that makes a lot of sense because he's been out there. He's been in the north. He's been beyond the wall so much. He's seen things. The Rangers know things that the rest of the Watch don't, and the rest of the world doesn't. So Mance searching for some power is information that Qhorin just accepts at face value. He doesn't question the absurdity of such a thing. Like, some power? Come on, that's ridiculous. Mormont's kind of like, but Qhorin is like, no. Natural confidence and authority. It even gives Jon pause. It gives us readers pause. It makes us think, whoa, this is serious.
I just want to say, how can you see a skin changer and not believe in magic?
Yeah, right?
Just straight up, I feel like Qhorin has to have, right?
I would think so, but maybe not. I mean,
maybe not.
It's not clear that Jon is yet. Jon doesn't know. So, of course, that happens while he's with Qhorin.
And I guess it's not clear to me how much Qhorin was a ranger.
Yeah,
but you have to think Qhorin has.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Qhorin's
older. Qhorin's like 50-ish or something.
Yeah, and he's older, so he has. So I don't know if I think Qhorin has, I guess.
Yeah, Qhorin was definitely old when he got to the wall, so he may have never been a ranger.
Yeah.
He's probably straight on the leadership track.
He ranged close.
Yeah. Either way, this is also interesting in that while Westeros is having its own changing of the guard with all this turmoil and new dynasties emerging and new houses emerging and other houses being shut down, this old-timer Qhorin is in the forefront of adjusting to the New World Order where The trees have eyes again. I mean, it's amazing. And we know even more than Qhorin does. Qhorin is fully confident, but we know even better than he does how right he is. And that's also the beauty of Qhorin. He's famous for being a total badass warrior, but the only time we see him fight, it's when he's trying to lose on purpose while making it look good. But he says so many things perfectly. It doesn't amount to his badassery isn't what impresses us. It impresses the other characters on screen. But what impresses us is how many things he says so perfectly. He's like an oracle of purpose and duty. He could write a book called The Zen of Rangers of the Night's Watch. That's the impression he leaves on Jon, and that's the value he's instilled in Jon by being so succinct and direct and having all that paired with his really extreme position of authority and reputation. Just the fact that he's someone that everybody listens to. So his decision to ask for Jon, he says, I want Jon to come with me, is really interesting in the light of all this because it might be his belief in the supernatural that's driving that decision. Quote,
"The old gods are still strong beyond the wall, the gods of the first men and the Starks."
So, yeah, that's really something, right? I want to consider that a couple questions from people here. Maybe why did Jon get picked, right? Besides the supernatural element. Treegill thinks that maybe Qhorin had this whole infiltrate the wildlings idea in mind already. He may have been a plan he was considering, and Jon was a good candidate because he's young. You need someone young to be convincing to switch over. It's just hard to believe that the Halfhand's veterans would switch sides. Like, they've been 20 years killing wildlings. Like, Halfhand himself asks at Grid, he's like, what would happen if I surrendered to y'all? Like, oh, we'd kill you. We'd torture you to death. But Jon, they're willing to believe. So that's a really interesting idea that maybe Qhorin was already thinking of that. It's possible. Archmaester Rennie and others think that it's Ghost. That's the reason that Qhorin recognizes that Jon is a skin changer, even if he doesn't, and that's something he wants with him.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah,
I definitely feel like who wouldn't want a direwolf with them on this mission?
Yeah, right. And indeed, Ghost comes up really big in this mission. So, yeah. A couple thoughts from Joe. Such a huge upheaval in Jon's storyline. It's similar to Game of Thrones. Things have been going kind of slow for Jon in the first book until all of a sudden he has to fight a white. Then the pace picks up and then it slows down again. Similar structure here. A slow walk into the forest, deeper and deeper, slowly getting more creepy. More and more supernatural elements are revealed. You get Craster, you get the Fist of the First Men, you get the buried dragon glass, and then the Halfhand shows up, and boom, he's off in the mountains hunting and being hunted. That's just a big, big change. And of course, as important as it is for us to consider things that we know this based on the fact that this is a reread. Well, the Wall is demanned right now, and Winterfell is about to be demanned as well, which is really huge because, as we know from history, anytime the wildlings actually got past the Wall, Winterfell stopped them. It's like two lines of defense. Usually, kings beyond the Wall are stopped by the Wall, but some have gotten past. But all of them were beaten by the North. None of them got any farther than that. So, right now, it's just wide open. Some more wildling standouts are named in this chapter. Just kind of cool to get that thrown out there. Rattleshirt, Harma Dog's Head, Alphen Crow Killer. All of them are dead now, though. Great quote here from Ed. Got to get that in.
Yeah. There are worse ways to die than warm and drunk. I knew a brother drowned himself in wine once. It was a poor vintage, though, and his corpse did not improve it.
You drank the wine?
It's an awful thing to find a brother dead. You'd have need of a drink as well, Lord Snow.
Well, it's not just funny. It's probably foreshadowing, huh?
Yes, for Dantos Holler.
Yeah.
And in particular, actually, it's also, I guess, more foreshadowing for Jon himself.
Yeah, probably, because Ed might be one of those who finds Jon dead.
It's that, but for me...
it works for other things. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's what Joffrey threatens Dantos with, that he's going to drown him in a cask of wine.
Yes, right on.
It didn't happen to him, but people choose to do it, apparently. Well, I guess, I don't know if he drowned. It says drown himself in wine, I guess.
Yeah.
Seems hard to do.
Yeah, kind of. Another Dolorous Ed quote here.
Dolorous Ed opined that glass knives were about as useful as nipples on a knight's breastplate, but John was not so certain.
Yeah, John thinks
Neither
nipples
was
on a breastplate are
HBO.
really useful.
Yeah, HBO thought so too.
So John at least has a sense that these knives are useful. He doesn't know why. He doesn't exactly understand it, but we can be pretty sure he'll learn eventually.
Oh wait, Joe Magician just had a thing where he said Aemon ending up in the cask of rum.
Oh yeah, Aemon did end up in a cask of rum. That's right, to
Oh,
preserve his body.
That's so sad, Joe.
Good catch by Joe there.
You're laughing.
Michael Klarfeld points out that Qhorin and Davos have a nice parallel. Maimed hand, killed to show false loyalty, right? They were both killed. Davos wasn't actually killed, but remember in Wyman Manderley pretends to have him killed to make it look like he's bending the knee to the Lannisters. And of course, Qhorin is actually killed, so Jon can join the Wildlings. Good catch by Michael. Good job, Michael. Good to hear from you. So the person we'll be most concerned for after all this is probably Sansa, because whoa, what did that line is out of place. Excuse me. Nina wonders about Qhorin's heritage. The QH name is only an Ironborn thing, is as far as we've seen. Unless Qhorin isn't one, then we do have one example. But we have Qhorin, Corwin, Qored Hor. Qhorin is a Volmark, I believe, and there's a Qhorin. I forget what name that one was, but there is another Qhorin Ironborn. So it seems kind of neat that he might actually be Ironborn, which would be that kind of personality coming from the Ironborn would be a little bit of a surprise. But it does fit. I don't know that we'll ever learn it.
I mean, he is a badass.
Yeah, and even though we know how he lost his 3 fingers on his right hand.
And think about the axe. I know.
Yeah, it was an axe that took it out.
You think he would be better at the axe throwing if he was an Ironborn?
Yeah. The Nina points out that it seems like a finger dance comparison or parallel. So that's cool.
I was like, I also wanted to point out, I really admired the description. Qhorin has really good posture.
Yes, it's straight as a spear.
Yeah. Anyways.
Okay, let us move on to Tyrion 10. The gang plan Shae's disguise, aka the one where Varys dreams of the voice. It's also the one with the full Tysha story. It's really a chapter with memorably awful childhood parts. Not only does Shae recount abusive treatment at the hands of her father, and speaking of childhood parts, Varys' memory of how he was cut and lost his parts. And then finally, this is the one with the story of, like I said, Tysha, but not just Tysha. I mean, Tyrion was a victim in that situation and an abuser. So, bleh. Fittingly, this chapter begins with a line spoken by another young person who is being terribly abused by the elders in his family as well, Lancel.
The queen intends to send Prince Tommen away.
So Tyrion agrees with Cersei's general idea, but plays this power game where he kind of takes over the mission by sending his men to run it his way. Now, it's also important to note here that Tyrion doesn't trust Bronn. He sends Sir Jacelyn Bywater and says that, I'll promote you to Lord if you do this well. And Tyrion's like, hey, Bronn's like, you can make me a lord, I'll do it. And of course, as we know, Bronn will become a lord later, and he's going to be lord of a neighboring castle to Rosby. It'll be Stokeworth. Now, was I not just talking about how themes are really emerging lately in this book? Surely there are several that we didn't highlight for y'all. Last time it was pride, and there was still some pride in this episode. But like I said at the beginning, this time it's the awakening of old powers. Even Varys, a guy who hates the supernatural, whose story has almost nothing to do with supernatural stuff, this is the one time he does talk about supernatural stuff that impacts him. His supernatural origin story, well, the voice. Quote,
"The flames turned blue, and I heard a voice answer his call, though I did not understand the words they spoke."
Yeah. One can suppose the sorcerer casting the spell did understand the voice. So here's my question. Did George R. R. Martin tell Dan and Dave that Varys would eventually find the sorcerer and get his revenge, and they just moved it up in the timeline to season 2? Or did they just completely add that on?
Also, what languages does Varys speak?
Oh, good question. Probably a lot of them. Oh, he may not have spoken all of them back then.
Yeah, back then,
but still,
maybe not, because I feel like Valyrian is one of the ones I feel like he would be most likely to have a smattering, at least some.
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so if that was Valyrian. Anyways, no way for us to really know right now.
Yeah, exactly.
But we have this quote.
Yep, do it.
"Yet I still dream of that night, my lord. Not of the sorcerer, nor his blade, nor even the way my manhood shriveled as it burned. I dream of the voice from the flames. Was it a god, a demon, some conjurer's trick? I could not tell you, and I know all the tricks.
So, real quick, before I get into the meat of that, I want to point out the difference of trick versus spell was raised at the beginning of this episode with Quaithe and the trick in the fire ladder guy. And she's like, that's not a trick. And that's because magic is returning. So, she knows all the tricks, or he says, I know all the tricks, but does he know all the spells? No, he does not. So he's but on the other hand, that is kind of evidence that it was really a spell and not a trick. A couple things about that. Well, one, it came, when Varys was young, which means magic was still in the world, even though it was less powerful. We could imagine that maybe if that sorcerer cast that spell today, that it would work better, maybe the voice would offer more. And given that question, what was the sorcerer getting? I mean, it's just a voice. So all he could get is information, right? That's all you can communicate by talking, right? I don't know what information, but it seems like that's all he could have gotten. So maybe Varys is lying about all this just as a way to make Tyrion confident that he's truly, truly opposed to Stannis. Just like, look, this is the kind of story that'll really make Tyrion confident that I'm not playing both sides, at least when it comes to Stannis. Which is an important thing for Varys to do. Make everybody know that he's on their side, because there's plenty of reason to doubt that he's on their side. So I kind of wonder, too, like the voice from the flames, is it simply like the audiobook version of fire reading? Like Melisandre stares into the flames and she gets ideas and sees things?
This sorcerer throws a penis in the flames and hears things?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Just to be clear.
Hey, I didn't write it. So the problem with this, there's an idea here that maybe this is sort of like a glass candle thing. Like a glass candle is frozen fire, and this is fire. So maybe it's sort of the same basic engine. But the problem here is that the voice, if it was another human speaking, then Varys probably wouldn't have been so terrified, to the point that it's the thing he remembers most. He remembers the voice more than the pain of being cut, which really tells you the voice is chilling, which really tells you it's probably not human.
I would like to bring up, Will Mossy says, the voice isn't necessarily the only thing that happened. Could be the voice of the great other doing something else, or just in general the idea that like the voice could be like, yes, it's as you command, whatever. It could be something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
So either way, that would maybe be an argument against it being kind of like a glass candle situation, because if that's like some being from beyond, well, I doubt they have a glass candle. They're just using some other means to communicate. Glass candles seem like things rooted in the real world, not in the nether voids of wherever these beings exist. So let's talk about Shae for a minute. She impresses both character and reader with her extremely just casual recognition of Varys in a disguise that would have fooled just about anyone. Like, Varys is like, whoa. She explains that it's a survivor skill that all sex workers need. They don't all have it, but they certainly, as she puts, it's important for them to have it. Now, Arya is going to acquire these skills as well, both not just Shae's skills, but Varys's, so keep that in mind. So all these themes of identity, both thematic and literal, as in, disguises, as in like literal disguising your identity, will continue with Arya's next chapter, right? With Jaqen H'ghar and all that. So will this theme of soup, of all things, soup. It's a subtle theme to be sure, but tasty. Allow me to explain, my lovely lords and ladies, friends and fellow historians and lovers of soup and stews, of which I am one.
But not the poop soup loop.
Well, yeah, I mean, Arya's going to have her weasel soup moment soon. And in this chapter, we have a much less ominous voice than the one Varys hears so long ago is introduced here. It's Simon Silvertongue, future member of A Pot of Soup. Iron coins and silver tongues. And he's just as screwed as the victims of the weasel soup incident. I mean, seriously, how doomed is a guy who tries to blackmail Tyrion, son of Tywin? Quote.
My singer may never sing again now, she teased. You scared the voice from him.
A little fear will help him reach those high notes.
She closed the door to their bedchamber. You won't hurt him, will you?
Well, yeah, he's gonna hurt him. Like I said, he ends up in soup. Part of the tragedy here, not of the singer, but of Shae, is that ability she showed to just recognize Varys, Tyrion could really use that in his like group of helpers, like Bronn and Varys and these others. Like, if he could employ her, that would be really useful. Surely she has other skills along those lines that would be helpful. But if not for Tywin and Cersei, well, really, a lot of Westerosi society is not so happy with the idea of a sex worker having such a high post. But it has clearly been done. Tyrion's own grandfather, Tytos, famously and openly had a sex worker for a lover that he dressed in his former wife's jewelry and
And
clothing.
I mean, he wasn't respected very well for it.
He was not, though. You're right. But he did do it.
But yeah.
In this scene, however, Varys won't even spill secrets in front of her. He's like, let's go talk about this elsewhere, even though he surely knows that Tyrion might just tell her anyway. Also in relation to the Singer's Stew, remember that's what it gets called, Singer's Stew. He says that there's a mention of how his tongue has turned to lead, which is, it's a silver tongue. And that, to me, is a reference to the old mafia phrase, plato o plomo, which is silver or lead. You either accept the bribery and fall under the mafia's sway, or they kill you. And that's kind of what Simon Silvertongue is faced with here. He either has to accept Tyrion's offer of pretending not to know him and keeping his mouth shut, or Tyrion's going to kill him. And, well, we know how that goes. But this is also really tragic. And again, I don't really care about Simon, but when Tyrion kills Shae, he's got Simon's song running through his head. Ooh. Shae, the idea of sending Shae to the kitchens, we broached the subject a little bit earlier. Tyrion's just blind to how bad this is, to this suggestion. Like, she really, really doesn't want to do this. And he just doesn't understand what he's asking of her. He just doesn't get it. She's willing to do it because, I mean, she doesn't really have much choice. And that's a big part of their dynamic, is that she pretty much has to do everything he says, even though he tries to act like they have some equity in their relationship. But we both know they don't really. He hits her because he can't stand to be mocked, and she mocked him. He was insulted, and that touches on his deepest traumatic beliefs about himself and from his childhood. But still, of course, he's like, why did I hit her? That's terrible. Why did I do that? But Shae also is also, while as smart as she is, she's also showing some naivete here. She's like, you shouldn't be scared of your father. And he's like, are you crazy? Of course I should be scared of my father. And you should too. But she's not only is she not afraid of Tywin, she's not really afraid of the crowds getting angry. She just seems to think that Tyrion is exaggerating, or just, I'm not really sure. But this whole idea of him being, how he can't stand to be mocked, especially by people he loves, that's going to come back big time when she goes into her, when she testifies against him and brings up my giant and how he wanted to be called that. And boy, that's bad for him. He feels so mocked at trial. So Varys breaks it down and is like, no, you can't do this. You can't send her to the kitchens. He just understands this so much better. He understands people of all levels of society much better than Tyrion does. And Tyrion is pretty good at reading people. It's just he's really good at reading people who are more on his social status, or at least close to it, and not so much people who are far beneath him. But again, Varys gets this really well and has a much better suggestion: bring her in as a maid to Lollies. And that does work out pretty well. And we'll be seeing her in that role a little bit later. So let's talk about Tysha. So Tywin's evil parenting, it's just so clear how much it had crushed Tyrion. Like, we already knew that to this point, but we didn't know how bad it was. Like, nothing we had read about Tywin to this point remotely approaches how bad the level of what this Tysha incident, even though there are plenty of pretty bad things in Tyrion's past brought on by Tywin that have nothing to do with this. But this is why Tyrion is so worried about his father, is what he did to Tysha. And so it's fair for him to worry about what he'll do to Shae. I mean, this is also what happens to Cersei in Dance of the Dragons. That's what Tywin did to his father's sex worker lover. He made her walk naked through the streets. I want to know what y'all think. Will Tyrion ever find Tysha? I personally don't think so.
I don't think so.
Shae doesn't think so either. All right. But I want to hear if you guys do.
I'm a big fan in general of mysteries, questions that just aren't answered.
Yeah.
That's life.
There's got to be a few. Yeah.
You don't know. I mean, it's not even like they're not big mysteries. Sometimes it's just like, what happened to that person?
Yeah.
You don't know. You never see him again.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. There's got to be some of that. Or, I mean, for George to keep the reality.
Especially in a medieval world.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like today with like, it happens today. We have Facebook and we have phones and all that. And you can still someone just falls off the face of the earth.
It's true. So here's an interesting little quote that Joe Buckley grabbed. She's my sister. The man who kills his own blood is cursed forever in the sight of gods and men. Well, yeah, what about killing your father there, Tyrion? So is that meant to be a little foreshadowing or just groundwork? Not sure. So as Joe says, adding on to the Tywin? Combined Tysha with Tywin there. More thoughts on Tysha from Joe. This is the most direct examination of his time with Tysha we get from Tyrion. He all but admits to himself here that he doesn't believe he can be loved, that no one can love him, and that Shae is an actress who wants to move up in the world. But he's going along with it anyway. He's helped along by Shae being far from subtle this time round. Perhaps she worries that her chance is slipping away if Stannis comes and executes Tyrion. She might be feeling the pressure to kind of make her move now, in other words. But ultimately, all that knowledge brings him is enough frustration and enough past shame about Tysha to physically, to hit Shae. It makes him do that, and he's immediately very ashamed of it. But he did it, Nina says that Shae is the inverse of Tysha. This is a great take. Tysha was exactly what she appeared to be. A common girl who loved Tyrion for himself, but forced into a gang rape in a horrible form of prostitution. Shae is an actual sex worker who Tyrion wants to believe loves him for himself, but really is just caring for him as a client. So, yeah, that's too bad. Tyrion's just so mixed up on these things, and it's all his upbringing for the most part. Here's another quote. This one's from Tyrion. I love this quote.
At the warrior's altar, he used one candle to light another. Watch over my brother, you bloody bastard. He's one of yours. He lit a second candle to the stranger for himself.
I like that. That's really funny. And particularly the way Roy Dotrice reads it. He's like, watch over my brother, you bloody bastard. He really gets into it. So the offer to promote Ser Jacelyn, let's come back to that briefly. That's important because as good as Ser Jacelyn has been to him, things are really coming to a head, so he really wants to make sure that Ser Jacelyn sticks on his team because, well, as good as Ser Jacelyn has been, that, the other way to look at that is losing him would be really bad because he's been so valuable. I want to know what Varys was drugged with. I don't know, like what drug causes that effect where he can still feel what's happening but can't move, because that's a nasty drug.
It's like morphine.
Yeah. Well, morphine does block pain, at least, though. Still.
Oh yeah, I guess you could feel the pain. You're right.
That's like it's like it paralyzes you, but you can still feel everything. Like, yeah, that is terrifying.
Sounds like whatever. What are those sleep paralysis?
Oh yeah.
I wonder if people like that could feel pain.
Good point.
Probably wake them up.
So we'll end talk of this chapter with a little quote from the World of Ice and Fire, of all places.
In the Jade Compendium, Colloquio Votar recounts a curious legend from Yi Ti, which states that the sun hid its face from the earth for a lifetime, ashamed at something none could discover, and that disaster was averted only by the deeds of a woman with a monkey's tail. Nice.
And the reason that's important is the end of the chapter, Tyrion is lamenting his role as the twisted little monkey demon. And, well, we have long held the belief that the deeds of a woman with a monkey's tail refers to Daenerys, with Tyrion as her hand of the queen. So there you go. Catelyn 6. The one where winning is losing, a.k.a. the gang fights the Battle of Stone Mill. It's also the one with Tywin's fingering and fisting. Whoa there. What? Hey, not my words. Brienne's the one who says, these are just the tips of his fingers brushing, and if he can't find a passage, he will curl those fingers into a fist. Hey, again, not my words.
Yeah, that's not the best strategy.
Catelyn is ridden away from the south and also away from the supernatural, at least until Grey Wind returns with her son. For now, she is part of a fully human-only conflict, where she is witness to a nasty series of battles that appear to be yet another in a long line of victories for the North and Riverland's kingdom, but indeed, it's just another battle that won't lead to an overall win. And worse, this one actually backfires horribly. Quote,
"Tell father I've gone to make him proud."
yeah, well, that gets us back into the old pride theme that's been hanging over us for quite a while. You couldn't be more direct than him admitting that's what he's looking to do. But also, it kind of gives you a sense of who Edmure is. A couple people pointed out that Catelyn's thoughts on Edmure are that, well, Edmure has long kind of been a little bit have a chip on his shoulder about maybe not thinking his father was proud of him enough. He thinks of, Catelyn has had some of that role of being, she was his heir for a while and was treated as the heir until Edmure was born. And Edmure is still sort of in that shadow, even now.
He's the baby.
He is the baby. A few details from the battle. It's another new style of battle from a POV. Catelyn's seen battles before, but this is different. This is a contested river crossing. That's not something we've really seen. We will see another during the Battle of the Blackwater, though the circumstances are pretty darn different. So the main difference, though, is that while we've had Cat watching before, this time she's speaking to Brienne and Sir Desmond Grell, who explain parts of what's happening to her. And also, the Whispering Wood was her first, and her son was involved, and she was out in the open somewhat. So there was more writing on the outcome, and she was in greater danger herself, although she wasn't actually that worried. Still, fair to point that out. This time, it's not her first battle, not her first rodeo, and it's her brother out there instead of her teenage son, and she's on the walls of a castle she was born in instead of kind of out in the open in this forest. And this time, it would have been better if they had lost instead of it being a really important battle that they needed to win. The actual final battle is the Battle of Stone Mill, where Lord Lefford is killed, Strongbow is captured, although later he is freed. Gregor is actually driven back. Marbrand is driven back 3 times. Edmure gets all Gandalf-y by saying they shall not cross. So many dead horses. It's really pretty brutal. The number of deaths. It's really nasty. Like, she has less fear than in the Whispering Wood. She does have concerns. She wonders why she didn't see the sense in Edmure's plan when so many other lords did see the sense in it. But her doubt is paired with the fact that these characters are explaining battle to her. So it creates this sense of Catelyn's not supposed to know what's the best option here. She's not experienced in battle, and all these people around her are. But Kat's nagging doubts are correct. And they're the last part of the chapter. The chapter ends with those doubts. She's like, we're winning all these battles, but something isn't right. Indeed, something's not right. So let's talk about Edmure's blame or lack thereof, his role here, and whether he should have done this. Now, I'm of two minds, but mostly I'm on the side of blaming Edmure. Even though I like Edmure a lot, and I really respect that he's one of the very few lords to take care of his people, something we brought up earlier in this episode, super important. So he stands out as a really good guy amongst a lot of people who are uncaring or evil. Now, it's fair to say that even though Tywin or Edmure failed to consider the bigger picture, he didn't consider the whole Stannis versus Tywin angle of all this. And he really should have. So did all the Riverlords who approved this plan, though. None of them, at least not that we hear of, brought up, well, should we be considering the bigger picture? Really, it's Edmure just is about they shall not cross. He wants to pin Tywin between Harrenhal and the Riverlands. And so he's also ordered Roose Bolton to take Harrenhal, which he does. So Kat looks at a map at the end of this chapter and realizes where Tywin must be going. She thinks, well, now that he's been beaten, he must be, they know that he's headed southeast, and she thinks, well, he must be at the headwaters of the Blackwater Rush by now. So that sentence, that thought there, that's telling us that Tywin's army is going to be at King's Landing in time for the Battle of Blackwater. So we're being told right here that Stannis' army is going to get contested when they try to take King's Landing. So this was probably our biggest clue. Though she was right about the battle and the phrase. She still doesn't trust the phrase, even though Edmure gives effusive praise and lists off a fairly long list of deeds that they accomplished. But she's still nervous about that, and she definitely doesn't like the idea that Edmure pulled the garrison Robb left in the Twins. She says, well, she makes the point that, yeah, okay, so you say they've been really loyal, but what if the fact they've been really loyal is partly due to the fact that we have men inside their castle, in addition to the hostages we have? So she makes the point that look, Lord Walder's done a good job for us, but don't mistake that for loyalty. Be realistic here. He's ambitious. That's really what's going on. She doesn't say that, but she's kind of thinking it, and we know that. It's a fact. It's true. It's an opinion, but it's really a fact because it's just so true. So she despite all this being right about all these other things, she's wrong about one important thing, which is all these misplaced thoughts she has about Tyrion. She still thinks that he sent the killer after Bran. She thinks the dwarf is the worst of them. And this is sad because he clearly isn't. He's the best of them, even though, and this is, of course, because she's mistaken about what he did. Cersei is worse. Tywin is definitely worse. Come on, Joffrey. Joffrey's way worse. Let's be real here. But she doesn't know Joffrey. And she doesn't really even know Cersei that well, even though she has said she would love to go wrap her hands around her throat and strangle her. But somehow she thinks Tyrion's worse. So the singing theme continues here, along with Simon Silvertongue, and later, we're going to have some other songs, like Tyrion's thinking of the songs associated with Tysha. This time we have Ryman the Rhymer and his song Wolf in the Night, and this touches on some of the rumors, because Ryman's song calls for howling. And we have all these rumors out there that the army is that Robb is leading an army of wargs. We were quoting that in past episodes, and maybe this is part of where those rumors are coming from. If the Northern Army is actually howling after victory, even though it's just kind of part of a song and fun, other people are like, "Whoa, they're all howling. That's creepy as hell, man." So that's interesting. Yeah, I see Jaded Redhead in the chat pointing out that it's Rymond. Yeah, Rymond. Yeah,
Rymond the Rhymer. That's gonna be my rap name.
I'm Rymond the Rhymer, yo.
You couldn't come up with a rap, huh?
Not
with a rhyme.
Not off the spur of my.
You're not Rymond the Rhymer.
Yeah, I'm not Rymond the Rhymer or Rymond the Rapper.
I'm Rymond the Rhymers. My rhymes couldn't be flyer. Yeah. Nice. There you go. I'm not Christina. We need to get her in here.
So I wonder about that. I wonder if that's part of where that comes from. But the more important piece of songstress, songity, the more important tune here is the discussion between Brienne and Cat, where Brienne talks about how she loves songs, and that becomes a point of connection for them, because Cat says, "Oh, Sansa loves songs too," and well, maybe that's going to be a connection someday between Brienne and Sansa, a love of songs, because I do think Brienne and Sansa are going to come together eventually, and this conversation may come back up. She may say, "Hey, I talked to your mother about this." And it also is a really interesting parallel, because Catelyn says, "Someday you must sing for me." And Brienne's like, "No, I have no talent for singing." And she kind of walks off and is like kind of shy about it. Since we're tying that to Sansa, we can't help but think about Sandor, who also very recently was like, "Oh, I'm getting a song out of you." So I really wonder about that. I think there's a connection here somewhere. So I think that's pretty cool, because I had not noticed that before. I had not thought to connect this Brienne Cat moment to Sansa and Sandor.
I wonder if there'll ever be a scene like in the show where everyone's singing before the battle.
Ooh, that would be great. I hope so.
Brienne sings.
That would be really cool, because she could if she's singing in a group, her shame over her singing voice wouldn't matter as much. If it's like a whole group singing, she wouldn't be heard. Yeah. A lot of people tend to speak up when they're, also if you're drinking. That helps. So in the shadow of the philosophical conversations held by Tyrion and Varys and Stannis and Mel and Davos, Catelyn and Brienne get into some deep thoughts of their own, the nature of courage and death as it pertains to traditional Westerosi gender roles. Talk about woman's courage and, how knights go off to fight in bloody battle, while women have their battles are fought in the bloody birthing bed. And it's pretty interesting the way this gets broken down, and you wonder how this is going to play out later for Brienne, whether she's going to be knighted like she was in the show, and just in general where this is all going to go. I think it's pretty cool. It also stands in contrast to a lot of these other conversations, because there's just so many conversations throughout the series about the nature of duty, and it's usually framed as a masculine ideal. The Night's Watch, the King's Guard, and just duty to your family and all these other things. Because the duty of so many women is to be sent off and start a new family and to not be part of your old family. It's the men who stay within their own family because they keep their name, right? So they're brought up to be within their own house for life, whereas these women are brought up to eventually switch houses, which is just a totally different cultural attitude. It's a pretty big split in gender roles. Obviously there's big splits in Westerosi gender roles, but some of these things are less apparent than others. But still, it's really interesting how it's brought up that it's still a form of courage to deal with a lot of these issues, even though Westeros doesn't respect them as much as it respects, warriors. But Brienne clearly respects that as a woman herself. She has a better understanding and more regard for such things from Catelyn, and that builds a lot of mutual respect between them. Another important point here is Roos's letter here comes in this during this chapter. Does he know Ramsay is actually alive? He's like, oh, well, my son is dead, and I think he thinks Ramsay is dead. He just finds out later, because Ramsay's disguise was a spur-of-the-moment decision. He's being chased by Northerners, and he's like, I'm going to pretend to be Reek. I seriously thought that was planned in advance, and Roose knew about that. But clearly Roose learns at some point. Maybe we'll figure out where this point comes. Whether he knew or not, though, he's definitely not lying when he says the line, any new sons my frail bride will bear me will be in danger from Ramsay. Because, yeah, that's true. Roose is a liar, but he's not lying about that one. It could be soon, too. Roose and Ramsay are seen to be arguing by Theon late in A Dance with Dragons. And Walda, who is pregnant, is standing right there crying. And, well, there's also what happened on TV, which makes it very clear if that's indeed what's going to happen. Also, we have Cleos here. Catelyn gets him drunk, and it works pretty well. So, well, she uses it later again on Jaime. So Joe says, here it is in part 8, the act that ultimately changes the fates of all Westeros. King's Landing, Stannis, the Northern Cause, all their futures swirl around Edmure doing what anyone else would do, protect their home. Okay, so this is why I waited to weigh in more thoroughly on whether Edmure was at fault here or not, because I wanted to let Joe give this take here. And the reason I think that Edmure went too far is that, yeah, Joe makes a strong point that he's doing what people would do and protect their home, and that is certainly an attitude Edmure has already displayed. He's already shown that it's important to him. However, he was ordered to hold River Run and do nothing else. This is clearly a lot more than nothing else. He wasn't specifically ordered not to do this, but he was told to do nothing else. So I think I quibble with people who say Robb wasn't clear enough. I think maybe Robb could have been clearer, but just hold River Run is pretty clear. Maybe it would have been better to say, let Tywin pass. But do nothing is pretty much what he was told to do. And he did way more than nothing. He set up a line of defense in like 12 spots along the fords. Like this was an extremely thorough, organized defense. Like this was way, way beyond what he was told not to do. So people who want to argue that Robb should have been more clear, I feel you. I do feel you. I think that's true. I think Robb maybe should have been more clear. But I still put more blame on Edmure because he was told not to do something that he did. Just because he didn't know why isn't a good excuse. He was given an order, didn't follow it. I think it's a lot simpler than a lot of people make it out to be, even though I don't make it entirely simple. Anyway, Joe also points out that there's a nice little parallel here. It used to be Sir Roderick telling her about battles and knowledge on tactics and things like that. Not only do we have Brienne filling that role now, but we have Sir Desmond, who is Castellan of River Run. So it's like Sir Roderick was Castellan, the old Castellan, and now we have another old Castellan. Joe throws a little shade on Tywin. He says, just because I like the failing Tywin stuff, the details of Lannisters falling before Tully River Fair, the heavy casualties the Lannisters take, it all makes for fun reading. Not only does it make for fun reading, it makes me think of what the battles will be like in the future, meaning the battles against the dead, especially because a lot of battles will probably take place in the Riverlands, especially if we believe, like I've said earlier in this episode, that Harrenhal will be where the final battle maybe takes place in the Riverlands, which means they'll probably be skirmishing in the Riverlands before they get to Harrenhal, which means maybe trying to hold some river crossings against the dead.
Yeah, I think we'll see some more battles that are satisfying like this.
Yeah.
Before we get to the more devastating battles.
I think you're probably right. And
like, for example, I feel like the Battle of Ice is one that is set up to be one where like people are like, yeah, hell yeah. Hell yeah.
I think it's a really good point. Also, it brings us even closer to the undead because it's fighting in amongst like the ice
Yeah.
and the snow. But to be fair, this battle is fought at night, which is also kind of along those same lines. And of course, there's a lot of other things that make me think of future battles against the dead. First of all, the idea that Tywin is just spending his troops like coins, like sending them into really dangerous situations where they have to go through water and then up an embankment against men who are just waiting to take them down and shooting arrows at them and crossbows and ballistas from the walls. It's really awful. And we could at least maybe imagine that it'll be similar for that instead of these humans crossing the water and into certain death, it'll be the undead and it'll be the humans on the high banks. And one of the other things that really come up here is the Mallister bowmen are really key in these battles. We see them shooting a lot of fire arrows. And that, too, is a little foreshadowy in terms of the battle because fire arrows are clearly going to be important in fighting the undead. And they're so, evocative here because the battle happens at night. And there's all these huge arcing bow shots of many flights of flaming arrows. And that's it really paints a picture. But imagine them the targets being the undead instead and them just like crawling over each other. We
saw the Dothraki with their flaming Aurochs, too.
Oh, yeah. Good point. And Kat mentions like she thinks about how there's these piles of bodies and the clogged up. There's so many dead horses and things like that. Well, imagine that with the dead. They would crawl over each other and make like bridges of bodies. We've had a bridge of boats coming up later in the Blackwater, but we might have just the undead walking over each other because that's how they do. So Kat sees men floating down the river, which reminds me of the Tully funeral customs. And Kat thinks of herself as dead at the same time because Ned is gone. And, she hasn't even gotten the news about Bran and Rickon yet. And how she kind of thinks of, we kind of think of her as coming back to life later because, sort of. It's undead isn't fully alive. And that's also going to take place on the Trident. So only on a different fork of the Trident here. There's a lot of things wrapped up in her thoughts of death there and how it relates to her. And soon her father before her. So there's infinite awful things to say about war and battle, but this one particularly strikes me, the bits about what I was saying earlier about the Lannister soldiers. It's just, but again, it also makes me smile because it sets up the fighting the undead in the black of night, like the long night, and like one of our first explanations of this, or not explanations, examples of this is coming up at the beginning of the next book with the battle, the fight at the Fist of the First Men. Here's a little quote that Archmaester Rennie grabbed.
The men on the wall... Oh, sorry. The men on the walls shouted taunts after them, though they were already too far off to hear.
So the question is this a Monty Python reference? Shouting taunts on Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I will taunt you a second time. And there's definitely a point at which they're taunting and you can't hear what they're saying because they're so far off. They're just laughing and going, yoo-hoo, so I
think
be.
Definitely.
I think that's it. George likes Monty Python. So also we have maybe a nod to Ygritte because John's next chapter is going to be Ygritte showing up for the first time. And right here we have
Ser Cleo stared.
I know nothing of any.
You know nothing, she agreed, sweeping from the step.
Yeah, you know nothing. Catelyn also makes a statement that is just really has a lot of relevance to the real world.
As hard as birth is, what comes after is much harder. Yeah, that afterbirth.
Oh, gross.
Okay. She got gross.
Especially if it's a shadow baby. Like, whoa. Actually, that's easy. Just let it go. It does its thing, and then you're done. But yeah, so that's so true. Catelyn's talking. This of course comes up during the talk with Catelyn and Brienne and about all the difficulties that women face. And yeah, raising children is really hard. And in this world, it's harder because there's so many more dangers than there are in our world. Catelyn thinks on Jon's mother, interestingly enough. We actually get a mention of Ashara Dane in this chapter, because she's thinking about how the different ways that men treat their bastards and how wide a range of treatment those bastards get from their fathers and sometimes their mothers. She's mostly thinking about fathers in this case. She thinks that some will fiercely defend them while others will just throw them off, like ignore them or cast them aside like Roose Bolton. So it's interesting that she thinks of someone who just cast their bastard aside, Roose Bolton, when Ramsay is actually his, where she also thinks of people who were, very steadfast in defending a bastard, and she thinks of Ned and Courtney Penrose, but in that case, the bastard isn't theirs. So it's kind of a little inverse there. Okay, that is all I have for Catelyn 6. A very, another sad but interesting chapter, because Catelyn it's all the pall of her losses, and it's just going to get worse because the losses are going to mount. Her father is going to die next book. She's going to think Bran and Rickon are dead. I think it's her next chapter. But that won't be next week. But what will be next week is Bran 6, the one with Stranger Danger, a.k.a. Psycho Theon is back.
I didn't notice you went with that one for that. Damn, I'm disappointed.
Oh.
It should have been Psycho Euron is back. He's the one who actually comes real back.
Well, we could still do that.
Okay,
it can be both.
I'm just making sure I had that planned locked in the chamber for many years from now.
We'll do it.
Okay. Arya 9, the gang makes weasel soup, a.k.a. the one with Arya's new coin.
Daenerys 4, the gang gets undying, a.k.a. the one with all the threes.
Tyrion 11, the gang solves the wildfire crisis, a.k.a. the one where the clans swap Vale for Kingswood.
Theon 4, the one where Theon might be a kinslayer, a.k.a. Summer and Shaggy, decoy direwolf duo.
And finally, Jon 6, the one where Jon kills Orell, a.k.a. the one where Jon doesn't kill Ygritte.
Thanks for that, Shae, and I thank all of you who came to watch live, all of you who listened or watched afterwards, everyone who leaves iTunes review or supports us on Patreon or tells your friends, who likes and shares. All those things matter. We appreciate them all, and you'd be surprised how much some of those things matter. Thanks also to Michael Klarfeld, to Kevin McLeod, to Joey Townsend, to Jesse Kowal, to Joe Buckley. Make sure you check out Isle of Faces. That's his podcast. A lot of these chapters get deeper dives on his topics called Scraps and Scrolls. Big shout out to the History of Westeros mods. I get to shout them out in a variety of ways because sometimes I'll use their real names, but today I'll use their Patreon names because, hey, all of them are patrons. How cool is that? Rebea, Laura Boros, Hema Helminth, Bloody Ben Blackwood, Lady Lajara Dajo, and last but not least, Koholkoe. Shout out to Koholkoe, whose real name is Jennifer Taylor. Shout out to her new podcast called Vanished. It's a Sleepy Hollow podcast, and Shae and I did some voice work for it.
Yeah,
so,
I was Katrina Von Tassel.
I was Brom Bones.
Yeah, you were.
That was pretty fun. So yeah, check that out if that's your kind of thing. They did a good job, and it's just getting started. They've only got a couple episodes out. So anyway, also thanks to some of our most prolific commenters. Nina Friel is our most prolific Facebook commenter, and she's done such a great job of adding so much to these discussions, as well as helping us out with some of the timestamps. Tree Girl and Stefan B. and Archmaester Rennie, along with others, are getting shouted out a lot for their comments on Flick. So if you want to join on either of those social media spots to join the discussion, get to it and join the discussion. Have fun. If not, just keep coming back to the episodes. We'll see you then. Until then,
join Steven Stark for The Expanse.
Oh, yeah. Steven Stark's covering season 3 of The Expanse right after this.
Yeah, 9 minutes or, so.
Yeah. Also, I was supposed to be on his show last week. We advertised that I would be on I Know That Nerd, but there were major technical issues, so we rescheduled for December 8th. So check that out when it happens. And we'll see you then. Until next week, till I Know That Nerd, until
I interrupt you again.
Until I was going to say, until you appear on Maester Crescen's prologue trivia. We'll see you next time, and you know what to do. Valar, Rereadis.